guy standing in the back, he's with his light on.
Take it seriously. It's excellent. Well, I wasn't trying to get that reaction, but I appreciate it. It was the right reaction.
Good morning to
How are you?
Good morning to Good morning to Oh, your brother's busy.
No, it's the opposite.
I was thinking.
Did I? You cackle. I cackle? Yeah. Oh, sorry, I panicked for a second. I thought I was with you. Yeah, I laugh a lot. I have a... Sure, okay, I'll take that. Look, everybody has their own laugh, and it's natural. Yeah. I take it as a compliment. Mean it, but I'll take it.
More than enough people here to start the meeting. We have a quorum. Good morning. Today we're going to vote on Senator Sessions' nomination to serve as Attorney General. After we vote on Senator Sessions, we'll turn to legislation and other committee housekeeping business on the agenda. I'd like to mention a few things before we proceed. Except for the ranking member, I'll ask everyone to try to limit their remarks to 5 minutes. That's how I handled Lynch's nomination. And by my count, every Democrat on this committee, except for 2 that I know about, has already announced that they intend to oppose the nomination. So there's no mystery how this thing may go today as far as the final vote's concerned. With everyone's cooperation, we should be able to move forward in an orderly way. 3 weeks ago, Senator Sessions testified before this committee for more than 10 hours. Throughout that testimony, the American people had the opportunity to hear and learn directly from Senator Sessions that what all of us on this committee already knew to be true because we have served with him for so long. He knows the department better than any nominee for Attorney General in recent memory. He's a man of integrity. He's a man of his word. And most importantly, he will enforce the law regardless of whether he would have supported passage of that law as a member of the Senate. He explained that he enthusiastically prepared he is prepared to set aside his role as a legislator and adopt a new role as our chief law enforcement officer. And he told us he'll execute that law with strength, with integrity, and with independence in order to provide for equal justice for all. That's precisely what we want in an attorney general: equal and fair application of the law. His answers to written questions made all this more clear. And I might add, there were quite a few written questions given to him in addition to what went on during those 10 hours. Senator Sessions answered roughly 700 written questions, including over 350 questions from members who announced that they would vote against his nomination even before they submitted a single written question. One consistent thread that ran through all of his answers is this: he will follow the law, regardless of whether he would have supported it as a matter of policy as a senator. The written testimony that we heard at his hearing tells the same story. We heard from witnesses concerned that the Attorney General must provide full and fair law enforcement. And then we heard from witnesses who have known Senator Sessions personally and worked for and with him for decades. Those witnesses included former Attorney General Mukasey, former Deputy Attorney General Thompson, and lawyers who worked with Senator Sessions for a long period of time. All of those witnesses who actually know Senator Sessions said, in effect, the same thing. If you are concerned with securing the strong and equal enforcement of our laws, you should look no further than Senator Sessions to find an Attorney General that's up to that task. Senator Sessions was asked a number of questions about policy positions he's taken as a legislator. That's good and well. But the test isn't whether or not you agree with policy positions Senator Sessions may have taken as a legislator. I'm going to refer to what Ranking Member Feinstein said in her opening statement at the hearing on this question. The test is whether Senator Sessions, as Attorney General, will uphold the laws he voted against as senator. On issue after issue, then, Senator Sessions made clear that he will. It's important to recall what Senator Sessions said in this regard, quote, "The office of Attorney General of the United States is not a normal political office, and anyone who holds it must have total fidelity to the laws and the Constitution of the United States," end of quote. And everyone on this committee, be they Republican or Democrat, knows Senator Sessions to be a man of integrity and a man of his word. Because we know him to be a man of his word, we know that he will uphold and enforce all laws equally without regard to person, just as he pledged. I'll take a second and address a few questions concerning executive orders issued by the President. Some on the other side have raised concerns about Senator Sessions, whether he was involved in drafting or reviewing the executive orders. It's not clear to me why it would be a problem even if he had been involved. But the fact of the matter is he was not involved. In his written responses to Senator Leahy, Senator Sessions stated for the record, quote, "Neither I nor any of my current staff," and though, end of quote, "had a role in formulating or drafting the executive orders." Ranking Member Feinstein also asked about the department's role more specifically the Office of Legal Counsel. Of course, as we all know, Senator Sessions is not yet Attorney General. He isn't yet running the department because now roughly 3 weeks and over 700 written questions after his hearing, this committee is still debating his nomination. To me, this underscores that we shouldn't needlessly delay this vote any further. The department needs strong leadership and needs it in place as soon as possible. I'd also like to take a moment to address a criticism I've heard lodged against Senator Sessions that I believe is particularly unfair. As I've said, it's fine to ask Senator Sessions policy questions about votes on legislation, but to imply that because he had a principled objection to a provision in a particular bill, that he therefore didn't support the underlying purpose of that legislation, and that sort of an approach is unfair. Senator Sessions has been repeatedly criticized for voting against the Democrat version of the 2013 Violence Against Women Act. Of course, his critics routinely fail to mention that he voted for my version of that act, which provided stronger provisions for grant accountability and tougher penalties for abuse. And of course, critics also conveniently failed to mention that Senator Sessions supported Violence Against Women Act reauthorization before, when it was brought up in 2005. So to claim that he didn't support the underlying purpose of that legislation is just a rhetorical trick. It's an unfair one and maybe even mean-spirited, and I'll explain it this way. We all know that members of this committee on both sides of the aisle disagree on bills of all sorts for reasons at different times. Every Democrat in this committee opposed my version of that legislation, which included mandatory minimums to combat child pornography and assault. Are we then to conclude that members who oppose my amendment aren't concerned about child pornography? Of course, we should not make that accusation. Or what about debates that we've had over the years about legislation that included the death penalty? When members oppose legislation to combat terrorism because that legislation includes the death penalty, would it be fair for us to claim that those members don't care about protecting the nation against terrorism? Of course not. If we were to do that, that would be shameful. There are members of this committee who have principles objections to mandatory minimums and the death penalty. By and large, I disagree with those policy positions, but they are just that, policy disagreements. We can and should have those debates, but we should have them in good faith and not impute a motive to another senator that we know they don't possess that motive. Rather than focus on policy disputes that we've had over the years, I think it's more productive to consider some of the important questions Ranking Member Feinstein asked at the beginning of our hearing. Questions about whether he, Senator Sessions, as Attorney General, will be an independent holder of that office, who will enforce the law in a fair and even-handed way. Those are the right questions to ask. First, will Senator Sessions enforce a law he voted against? Here's his answer, quote, "It is passed by Congress. It would be the duty of the Attorney General, whether they voted for or supported it, to defend it." Another important question, will he use the awesome power of the Attorney General fairly? Will he respect law and the Constitution? Senator Sessions answered, quote, "The office of Attorney General of the United States is not a normal political office, and anyone who holds it must have total fidelity to the laws and the Constitution of the United States," end of quote. And a final crucial question, will he be independent? Will he tell the president no when necessary and faithfully enforce ethics laws and constitutional restrictions. Quote, Senator Sessions answered precisely as an independent Attorney General should. He said the Attorney General, quote, must be willing to tell the President and other top officials no if he and they overreach. He or she cannot be a mere rubber stamp, end of quote. Senator Sessions has assured us that he will faithfully enforce the laws fully, fairly, and independently. These answers, combined with his life of public service and his experience working with each of us, assures me that Senator Sessions will make an outstanding Attorney General. I'm pleased to support his nomination and will be pleased to cast my vote in favor of his confirmation. I urge my colleagues to do the same thing. Before I go to Senator Feinstein, in regard to other items on the agenda, our staffs are continuing to work on an agreement on updates to the committee rules, so we will hold those rules over this week. The final item on the agenda, the Elder Abuse Prevention and Prosecution Act, a bill that this committee reported unanimously last September. Senator Blumenthal and I last year collaborated closely on its development after I chaired a hearing before the committee in which we learned that fraud and scams targeting seniors are widespread and growing. This bill tackles the financial exploitation of older Americans, which has been called the crime of the 21st century. It will be held over. Senator Feinstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your remarks. I listened very carefully to them. And in essence, in a way, my remarks, I think, respond to yours. I have respect for you, as you know. I differ in some of the conclusions, but so be it. We have now had the opportunity to observe the first full week of the Trump administration. In that brief time, we've seen a flurry of executive orders and presidential declarations like none before, some broad, some seemingly unconstitutional, some unenforceable, and all deeply concerning in their intent and legality. Specifically, the President has issued 6 executive orders and 10 presidential memoranda or directives in the first week of his administration, for a total of 16 major administrative actions. Among these, the President has issued a sweeping order to undermine the Affordable Care Act, prohibited funding to any international aid group for simply providing information to patients about abortion, suggested a 20% tax on exports from Mexico to pay for a border wall, and most egregiously issued multiple executive orders on immigration. Not one order, idea, or pronouncement was meant to bring this country together. They only serve to tear the country further apart. It's in this context, with these events, that we are being asked to consider this nomination. The President's nominee, a colleague of ours for some 20 years, is well known for his positions and point of view. He's been a staunch campaign partisan for the President. He has reinforced and supported the Trump mission, style, rhetoric, and views. He was the first senator to endorse. He has attended at least 45 Trump campaign events. He wore the hat. He was a leading voice. And during the campaign, he spoke at large rallies, smiling while crowds chanted, "Lock her up." Then in October of last year, at one of the presidential debates, and again at a rally in Virginia, candidate Trump repeatedly referenced him as my Attorney General. It is very difficult to reconcile for me the independence and objectivity necessary for the position of Attorney General with the partisanship this nominee has demonstrated. In fact, as you referred to, Mr. Chairman, just yesterday, the Washington Post ran a story chronicling this nominee's involvement and connection to the President, his team, and their first acts. The Post declared The directives bore Trump's name, but another man's fingerprints, Jeff Sessions. The article continued. These are the quotes. During the transition, quote, Sessions became a daily presence at Trump Tower in New York, mapping out the policy agenda and making personnel decisions, end quote. Quote, the author of many of Trump's executive orders is senior policy advisor Stephen Miller, a Sessions confidant who was mentored by him and who spent the weekend overseeing the government's implementation of the refugee ban. The tactician turning Trump's agenda into law is Deputy Chief of Staff Rick Dearborn, Sessions' longtime Chief of Staff in the Senate. The mastermind behind Trump's incendiary brand of populism is Stephen K. Bannon, who promoted Sessions for years as chairman of the Breitbart website, end quote. The Post went on to report that Senator Sessions, quote, lobbied for a shock and awe period of executive action that would rattle Congress, impress Trump's base, and catch his critics unaware, according to two officials involved in the transition planning, end quote. And finally, in a lengthy email for this story, Steve Bannon describes Sessions as, and I quote, the fiercest, most dedicated, and most loyal promoter in Congress of Trump's agenda, end quote, and said that Sessions, quote, has played a critical role as the clearinghouse for policy and philosophy to undergird the implementation of that agenda, end quote. Now, if this is true, how could we possibly conclude that this nominee will be independent? I myself asked him that question and just got back the response, and it was denied. But there are names cited. There's the Post article to read. It seems to me it's either true or false. The executive order issued last Friday is a case in point. The executive order temporarily bans the entry of persons from 7 Muslim-majority countries. It halts all refugee admissions. I believe this broad order goes against our core values. It disregards our obligations under international agreements, undermines critical protections in our Constitution, and it effectively bans one religion, the Muslim faith. Already this weekend, we saw confusion and protests at airports across the country. Press reports have stated that between 100 and 200 people were detained at American airports, and more than 300 were not allowed to board planes to the United States from foreign airports, including my home state of California. In addition, the order effectively bars entry of people ranging from Iraqi translators who helped American soldiers for years in Iraq to Syrian refugees fleeing horrible violence. It has also been interpreted to apply to people with approved visas and dual nationals. The question is, if confirmed, what will this nominee do? Will he support and defend these broad and destructive executive orders? Will he carry out and enforce the president's actions that may very well violate the Constitution? If past is prologue to the future, it's not difficult to assess that he will. Just one short year and 2 months ago, on December 7, 2015, then-candidate Donald Trump issued a press release calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States, end quote. 3 days later, on December 10, 2015, Senator Leahy, the man sitting to my left, authored a resolution in the Judiciary Committee. And here's what it stated, quote, it is the sense of the Senate that the United States must not bar individuals from entering into the United States based on their religion, as such action would be contrary to the fundamental principles on which this nation was founded, end quote. The vote was 16-4 in favor of the Leahy resolution. The chairman and a majority of Republicans, gentlemen, voted for it. But the nominee voted no. In fact, he spoke for nearly 30 minutes against it. He had to know that this type of ban would raise serious constitutional questions. He had to know that it was effectively unenforceable, but he supported it anyway. This no vote speaks volumes, but it was certainly not the last word. According to the Washington Post, and again I quote, "From immigration and health care to national security and trade, Sessions is the intellectual godfather of the president's policies. Sessions' reach extends throughout the White House, with his aides and allies accelerating the president's most dramatic moves, including the ban on refugees and citizens from 7 mostly Muslim nations that has triggered fear around the globe," end quote. Now, if it were just this one article by the Post, just one campaign event, just one vote, maybe there would be an open question. But there are many disturbing actions and statements throughout his record. Let me name some of them. I'm also concerned about the president's repeated calls for an investigation into voter fraud, simply because he lost the popular vote by 3 million. And again, last week, the White House press secretary reiterated the president's belief that there was widespread voter fraud in this past election and that millions of illegal votes were cast with no evidence whatsoever. What will this Attorney General nominee do? Will he use the awesome power of the Department of Justice and spend taxpayer dollars to launch partisan investigations into voter fraud? Or will he use his position to defend the voting rights of millions of Americans? When asked about voter fraud by Senator Franken, Senator Sessions responded that he believes, and I quote, "We regularly have fraudulent activities occur during election cycles," end quote. In reality, claims of widespread voter fraud have been repeatedly debunked, and even isolated cases have found to be extremely rare. This past December, excuse me, the Washington Post reviewed the 2016 election, and out of over 135 million people voting, they found 4 documented cases of voter fraud. If confirmed, what will Senator Sessions do when faced with questions on reproductive rights? This is an issue of real importance to a dominant majority of women in this country. At this hearing, I asked directly if it is still his view that Roe v. Wade is, quote, "one of the worst, colossally erroneous Supreme Court decisions of all time," end quote. He said, quote, "it is," end quote. He said he will, quote, "respect," end quote, Roe v. Wade, but believes the decision, quote, "violated the Constitution," end quote. As Attorney General, who says he believes a woman's well-established fundamental rights are unconstitutional, is essentially inviting states to pass more restrictions to women's access to health care, knowing full well the Justice Department may, in fact, support those in court. In fact, I asked whether the Justice Department, under his leadership, would seek to overturn Roe or change precedent on reproductive rights. He left the door open by saying, and I quote, "Such decisions would depend upon the unique circumstances of the case or cases as they arise. I will not prejudge the issues, end quote. And when asked by Senator Blumenthal whether he believes a woman should be punished for having an abortion, as the president said during the campaign, Senator Sessions could have given a simple no answer, but he did not. He refused to rule out punishment for women. Instead, he merely noted that while the Supreme Court had upheld the right to an abortion, that right had been limited by various state and federal statutes, quote, many of which have been upheld as constitutional, constitutional, end quote, and noted that his role as Attorney General would be to faithfully enforce all laws. He clearly left open the possibility that he would enforce laws that punish women. The final issue I'd like to touch on, Mr. Chairman, is civil liberties. Ever since 9/11, we've had an intense struggle between civil liberties and national security. I think people know I believe in strong national security, but I also believe we must never sacrifice our values or fundamental constitutional rights as Americans. It's clear from the record the nominee believes otherwise. Senator Sessions was one of only 9 senators in 2005 to vote against the Detainee Treatment Act, which contained Senator McCain's and my bipartisan amendment that prohibited cruel, inhumane, and degrading punishment for individuals in American custody. In 2008, on the Senate floor, he praised a prior Attorney General for refusing to rule out the use of waterboarding in the future and claimed that enhanced interrogation techniques were necessary to stop additional terrorist plots. Specifically, he stated, and I quote, "I'm glad Attorney General Mukasey is able to say waterboarding was utilized only 3 times and that it had not been used in 5 years. But I am glad he also said he would not say it would never be done again," end quote. That's not true. In fact, one detainee alone was subjected to waterboarding 183 times. And as the Senate Intelligence Committee's extensive study on the CIA's interrogation program revealed, these so-called enhanced interrogation techniques, particularly waterboarding, were and are ineffective and did not produce actionable intelligence. And in the summer of 2016, the nominee was one of 21 senators to vote against prohibiting waterboarding and other techniques not found in the Army Field Manual. He has even expressed support for the detention of Americans captured on American soil to be held without charge or trial. These positions give me no confidence the nominee will uphold our laws and civil liberties as Attorney General. Mr. Chairman, today we are being asked to vote on the one person who will lead the Department of Justice and its 113,000 employees charged with defending the interests of the United States according to our nation's laws and ensuring fair and impartial administration of justice for all Americans. We're being asked to vote on a nominee that will have to stand up to a president who is clearly willing to ignore the law and even issue orders in violation of the Constitution. We are being asked to determine whether this nominee's record demonstrates that he will have the objectivity to enforce the law for all Americans and be an independent Attorney General and not an arm of the White House. Yesterday, early in the evening, we clearly saw what a truly independent Attorney General does. Sally Yates, the acting Attorney General, who enjoyed broad bipartisan support when she was confirmed as Deputy Attorney General, declared that under her leadership, the department could not defend Trump's executive order on immigrants and refugees. Here's what she wrote, and it's important, and I quote, "My responsibility is to ensure that the position of the Department of Justice is not only legally defensible, but is informed by our best view of what the law is after consideration of all the facts. In addition, I am responsible for ensuring that the positions we take in court remain consistent with this institution's solemn obligation to always seek justice and stand for what is right. At present, I am not convinced that the defense of the executive order is consistent with these responsibilities, nor am I convinced that the executive order is lawful," end quote. Consequently, for as long as I am the Attorney General, the Department of Justice will not present arguments in defense of the executive order until I become convinced that it is appropriate to do so. Members, that statement took guts. That statement said what an independent Attorney General should do. That statement took a steel spine to stand up and say no. It took the courage of Elliot Richardson and William Ruckelshaus, who stood up to President Nixon. That is what an Attorney General must be willing and able to do. I have no confidence that Senator Sessions will do that. Instead, he has been the fiercest, most dedicated, and most loyal promoter in Congress of the Trump agenda and has played a critical role in the clearinghouse for policy and philosophy to undergird the implementation of that agenda. With this in mind, I must vote no. Thank you.
Senator Hatch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I enthusiastically support the nomination of our colleague and longtime member of this committee, Senator Jeff Sessions, to be the next Attorney General of the United States. His qualifications for this position are unmatched in American history. None of the previous 83 U.S. Attorneys General had his experience in both developing and implementing criminal justice policy. As I reviewed the widespread support for his nomination, I was struck by the strong relationship between support for him and knowledge about him. The longer and better people knew Jeff Sessions, the more they support his nomination. Mr. Chairman, one of the letters we received was from Judge Louis Freeh, well known to all of us as the director of the FBI under President Bill Clinton. He writes, quote, "I have served and interacted with Senator Sessions for over 25 years and have always been greatly impressed with his commitment to the rule of law, his fair and balanced prosecutorial judgment, and his personal dedication to protecting civil rights. I believe that Jeff will be an outstanding Attorney General for the nation," unquote. Another example comes from our former colleague, the late Senator Arlen Specter. He served for many years on this committee, including as chairman. He was one of my friends. More than 20 years after he voted against Jeff's 1986 nomination to the U.S. District Court, Senator Specter said that this was the one vote out of more than 10,000 that he regretted. What changed his mind? It's simple. He served with Jeff Sessions. He got to know him, Jeff Sessions, and he saw the real Jeff Sessions in action. The confirmation process for this nomination has been very revealing. Senator Sessions' critics, for example, appear to believe that an Attorney General, at least a Republican Attorney General, cannot fairly enforce a law that he personally opposes or may have voted against. I reject that notion and am confident they would think differently if a senator from their side of the aisle were one day nominated to this position. If anything, basing decisions on political rather than legal factors was becoming the hallmark of previous administration's Justice Department. They reneged on their commitment to defend in court laws that Congress enacted, not because there were no reasonable arguments to defend those laws, but because the administration politically opposed them. Imagine if Senator Sessions had said that he planned to be the arbiter of whether statutes or executive branch actions were right or just. Imagine if he had said that the Justice Department would defend only those that he deemed to be wise. I can hear the howls of protest, the condemnation, and the calls for opposition. Thankfully, he is not so arrogant as that. Senator Sessions' critics, or at least some of the most vocal, also seem to care nothing for the actual facts of Senator Sessions' record. They refuse to tell the truth, even about something as simple as his support for the Violence Against Women Act. He supported its reauthorization in 2000, he supported it in 2005, and he supported it again in 2013. Mr. Chairman, Senator Sessions is honorable, he's fair, he's a man of the highest integrity, and I think we all know that. He is committed to the rule of law, loves the Justice Department, and has the experience to lead it in the right direction. All I can say is that the fact that we might differ on some interpretations of the law doesn't mean a person isn't good or can't do this job in the Justice Department. The fact of the matter is, I don't know of many people that have the qualifications that Jeff Sessions has, and there have been no attorneys general that have had the amount of experience before becoming Attorney General that he will have had. All I can say is he's a man of integrity, a decent, honorable man, and I hope that we can pass him through this committee.
Senator Leahy.
I'll be back.
Excuse me. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. You know, it is almost as though we're discussing two different people here. But maybe that's because it is a strange year. Certainly the strangest I've seen in the years I've been here in the Senate. And what we saw last night illustrates what's at stake with this nomination. I've said and I believe that the President's decision to fire Acting Attorney General Sally Yates is shameful. His accusation that she betrayed the Department of Justice is dangerous. The Attorney General is the people's attorney, not the President's attorney. He or she does not wear two hats, as one Attorney General tried to claim years ago. It's not the Department of Justice, or is not the Secretary of Justice. It's the Department of Justice. It is not the President's attorney. It is the Attorney General of the United States, one who's there for everybody in the United States. Now, Sally Yates exemplified the best of this role, and I want to thank her for nearly 3 decades of service to this country as a U.S. attorney when she strongly prosecuted some of the most serious crimes in this country, did so irrespective of the political leanings of the people she was prosecuting. And she served in the finest tradition of the Justice Department. She sets a high standard for the department and for the nation. I called her this morning and told her that. I'm also remember the question she was asked by Senator Sessions under oath. And she was asked, would you be willing to stand up to a president? Would you be willing to tell a president when he's wrong? Those of us around this table remember that. And under oath, she said she would. Well, she kept her word. She upheld her oath. She did what she was supposed to do. Senator Feinstein mentioned Elliot Richardson and Bill Ruckelshaus. They did the same. I knew them both as people of integrity. I know Sally Yates as a person of integrity. Despite the president's strong interest in implementing a Muslim ban, as he promised to do in his campaign, Ms. Yates concluded his immigration executive order was not legally defensible. This was not a surprising conclusion. The executive order discriminates by design. It's wrong. I believe it is illegal. Several federal courts have already found that President Trump's order is very likely unconstitutional. But Ms. Yates' willingness to defend the rule of law instead of defending President Trump's political whims demonstrates exactly why having an independent attorney general is so important and why we have to be so careful in selecting our next attorney general. Understand what's happening here. I've been here with numerous administrations, Republican and Democratic. I think one of my first roll call votes was for a Republican Attorney General, William French Smith. I then declared I would vote for Attorney General Barr, and we all felt enough that way we had a voice vote. But these are people I thought would defend the independence of the Justice Department. As a young law student, I and 2 or 3 others picked by the Attorney General from different law schools were interviewed by the then Attorney General. We asked them similar questions about how independent the Attorney General could be. Could they be independent if it's in the interest of justice, independent of the President of the United States? And as a young law student, I'll never forget the response. He said we'd have to do what we have to do. If somebody commits a crime, breaks the law, we'll have to take action. The Attorney General did that in a celebrated case where he prosecuted someone from Illinois who had been vital in the election of the president who appointed him. The president who appointed him was his brother. This was Attorney General Robert Kennedy. And he prosecuted. He showed the independence of the Department of Justice. Now, President Trump has placed the independence of the Justice Department at stake. He's put the department on notice. If you adhere to your oath of office to defend the Constitution, then you risk your job. That no president should say of the Department of Justice. At this critical time, we need an Attorney General who can stand up to the president, someone with fidelity to the rule of law, not a political ideology, someone who will support the thousands of career prosecutors in the department, people who are Republicans or Democrats or have no political affiliations. They're career prosecutors. They serve our nation. They defend the Constitution without fear or favor. Now, there is something looming over this nomination that I suspect is in the minds of both Republicans and Democrats. The fact is we're debating who should be an Attorney General in a Trump administration. This is an administration that needed only 1 week, to find itself on the losing side of an argument in federal court. I've been here with President Ford, President Carter, President Reagan, President Clinton, President Bush, both President Bushes, President Obama. Never, ever seen anything like that. In fact, the administration's unpredictability, recklessness, extreme agenda casts a shadow over all of the president's nominees, and that includes Senator Sessions. Now, I was a junior member on this committee 31 years ago when Jeff Sessions was nominated to a federal judgeship. This committee, Republicans were in the majority, was chaired by Republican Strom Thurmond. But the committee, on a bipartisan basis, rejected his nomination. We were not confident that he would be a fair judge. But I'm not basing my decisions on that case. That was then. We're talking about something different. Today, we're considering Senator Sessions for a different role. He's nominated to be the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States. Not the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the President, but the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States. That includes every one of us. Attorney General has to be independent. He must faithfully serve all Americans. And I've carefully reviewed, in fact, I find it hard to remember when I've reviewed a nominee's record so thoroughly as I have this. I reviewed his extensive record. I reviewed his responses to serious questions asked by this committee. I'm not convinced he meets the threshold standard. And so I have to oppose this nomination. It's nothing to do with friendship with Senator Sessions, somebody I've known. But it has to do with whether he would be the kind of independent person we need as the Attorney General for all the country. I have very serious doubt that Senator Sessions would be an independent Attorney General. Let me give you a few reasons why. There have been months of media coverage about President Trump's many conflicts of interest and the constitutional concerns they present. Months that's been in the press. But Senator Sessions has repeatedly evaded my questions on this topic by claiming he hasn't studied the issue. He even refused to acknowledge that it's a conflict of interest for a president to have a personal financial stake in policies pursued by his administration. That's the very definition of conflict of interest. That's conflict of interest 101. Presidents should not personally profit from their decisions. This is willful blindness on the part of Senator Sessions and extends even to Russian interference in our democracy. I asked him a series of questions. We talked about the intelligence community's report, quote, on Russian activities and intentions in recent U.S. elections. Most of that report has been made public. If there are any parts that haven't been made public, they've been available to every senator, as those who served with distinction on the Intelligence Committee, like Senator Feinstein, know. Multiple times he answered my questions by stating, I've not reviewed the report, but I have no reason not to accept the Intelligence Committee's conclusions as contained in the report. So I asked him whether the activities described in the report are illegal and a threat to our democratic system. Now, that's not a difficult question. The answer should be an obvious yes. If Senator Sessions is not willing even to acknowledge facts that make President Trump uncomfortable, how can we believe that an Attorney General Trump would ever be able to say no to President Trump, as attorneys general of both parties have been able to do in the past? Senator Sessions' record on civil rights, his lack of independence from President Trump leave me particularly worried. He'll fail to protect Americans' constitutional right to vote. Nothing is more sacred in our democracy than the right to vote. I know that's the way Vermonters feel. But Senator Sessions declared it is a good day for the South when the Shelby County decision was handed down, effectively gutting the Voting Rights Act, an act that passed by overwhelming majorities of Republicans and Democrats in both the House and the Senate. I remember us standing proudly with President George W. Bush on the lawn of the White House when he signed the bill. And all of us, Republicans and Democrats, saying this was good for the country, for all the country, all the country. But Senator Sessions declared it was a good day for the South when the Shelby County decision came down. Senator Sessions has consistently sought to undermine the achievements of the Voting Rights Act as he did in the Perry County case as U.S. Attorney. The fact that Senator Sessions voted to reauthorize the act once in 2006, as almost everybody did, provides little comfort when he turned around and argued it was unconstitutional right after a unanimous Senate vote. And senators know sometimes it'd be hard to get a unanimous Senate vote to say the sun rises in the east. But here we had a unanimous Senate vote. Many Republicans, like Speaker Ryan and Senator Graham, have rightly condemned President Trump's wild conspiracy theory that millions of illegal votes cost him the popular vote last November. The White House quotes somebody who plays golf in Florida that he heard people ahead of him and behind him in the line saying how they were going to vote illegally. Turns out, however, of course, this person was not qualified to vote, never went in the voting line, never said it, but boy, it was treated as gospel. Millions of illegal votes. The state officials who have to count the votes, Republicans and Democrats, have debunked this. But I fear this dangerous falsehood will be used as a justification to further attack the hard-won right to vote for racial minorities and students and poor and elderly citizens who suddenly find the voting booths change or things put outside places they could easily reach. But more importantly, Senator Sessions has again refused to acknowledge a fundamental and plainly visible fact. The president is flat out wrong. Instead, Senator Sessions said in a written response to me last night that he does not know what data the president might have relied upon. Of course he doesn't know what data. There is no such data. And you ought to just admit that. Just because you make up a fantasy does not mean it is real. The next thing we're going to hear is the unicorns voted. Senator Sessions' close ties to President Trump and the important role he's already played in the campaign, the administration, raised important questions about his impartiality in matters involving the president. I asked him several times, remember he's under oath, about scenarios in which he would recuse himself, given clear conflicts of interest. But he brushed these questions off, suggesting that he was merely a supporter of the president's during the campaign. Senator Sessions is selling himself short. He was widely reported to be a central figure in the Trump campaign. And just yesterday, Steve Bannon called him the administration's clearinghouse for policy and philosophy. And the relationship appears to fly in the face of the Justice Department's recusal standards. The department's standards, which are codified, mandate recusal when the attorney has a close identification with an elected official rising from service as a principal advisor thereto or principal official thereof. So, in fairness to Senator Sessions, I asked him whether that language would apply to his relationship to President Trump, but he refused to say one way or the other. Now we find the independence of the Justice Department under siege, and I find his lack of response to this critical question to be unacceptable. I also have serious concerns about his willingness to protect the most vulnerable in our community. In 1986, a member of this committee, Senator Ted Kennedy, called Jeff Sessions a throwback because of his conduct on civil rights issues. I said I would look at where he'd been since that vote. Well, since the committee's bipartisan rejection of his first nomination, his record shows there's reason to be concerned. Time and again, when the rights of women, of LGBTQ individuals, disenfranchised communities have been debated here in the Senate, Senator Sessions has not sought to protect their civil and human rights. Too often he has been the one, sometimes the only one, standing in the way. In 2009, Senator Sessions opposed extending hate crime protections to women and LGBT individuals, groups that have been historically targeted based merely on who they are. And he stated, quote, "I am not sure women or people with different sexual orientations face that kind of discrimination. I just don't see it." Well, open your eyes and you will see it. Talk to the police anywhere in this country. Go anywhere in this country. You will see it. You will see it. But fortunately, a bipartisan majority of senators saw it. And the Matthew Shepard and the James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act is now law. And these protections are needed more than ever. In fact, if you look at FBI statistics, LGBT individuals are more likely to be targeted for hate crimes than any other minority group in this country. Senator Sessions also opposed the bipartisan 2013 Leahy-Crapo Violence Against Women reauthorization legislation. Now that overwhelmingly passed the Senate with a support from a majority of Republican senators. During his hearing and in written questions, Senator Sessions refused to commit to defend this important law's constitutionality. He said only he'd carefully study it to determine whether it is reasonably defensible. It is the law. It is the law of the land. No court has struck it down. In fact, since enacted, nobody has challenged it in any court in the country. But he'll study it to see whether it should be defended. His refusal to voice support for VAWA is all the more troubling in light of reports that the Heritage Foundation's budget blueprint, which is being relied upon by the new administration, calls for eliminating all Violence Against Women Act grants. I asked Senator Sessions to commit to stand up for women, preserve these critical programs. Again, he refused. Amita Swadine, who appeared before our committee, bravely shared the story of being raped as a child, explained why this issue is so important. We need an Attorney General who will continue the progress we've made since the initial passage of VAWA, someone committed to improving and enforcing our laws, to ensure the most vulnerable victims of crime can come forward to seek accountability and to access healing. This law and these grants are a matter of life and death to many people across this country. I still have nightmares about some of the crime scenes I went to, usually at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. A battered woman dead as we saw it, who did it. We didn't have the things we have in VAWA. We didn't have the grants. We didn't have the programs where she'd have a place to go and seek protection. She had those programs. Many of these victims I saw, as I ordered autopsies, would be alive. Those are realities. Those are realities. How can anybody who's going to be in a position to enforce our laws turn their back on that? Or suggest the law should apply to only certain classes of women? Those crime scenes, I never heard the police officers say, well, we can only investigate this if we determine the dead victim is straight and not gay. Only if we determine that the dead person is a citizen, not an immigrant. We have to determine whether they're a Native American or not. Otherwise, we can't seek the person who did it. No, they went to get the person who did it. And we need an Attorney General who understands this. Now, another issue that concerns me is criminal justice reform. For years, I've worked with a bipartisan group of senators on this committee to reduce mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses. These sentences have created perverse disparities within our justice system. Racial minorities still receive nearly 80% of them. Our bipartisan effort has had the strong support of the Justice Department and many in law enforcement. But not Senator Sessions. He's fought hardest against even modest sentencing reform. If you're a wealthy white person working on Wall Street, and on Friday, your supplier comes with $200 worth of, $300 worth of powder cocaine. If you're found, you at most get a slap on the wrist. Maybe say, how could such a wonderful person do something like this? Maybe they should serve 3 weekends serving food at a soup kitchen. If you're a black person in the inner city, you buy an equal amount of crack cocaine, you're going to go to prison. You think you're ever going to get a job when you get out? And his role as a campaign advisor to President Trump only gives me additional cause for concern. The Washington Post, and Senator Feinstein referred to this, read an article calling Senator Sessions the intellectual godfather of the president's hardline policies and executive orders. The article said, quote, the directives bore Trump's name, but another man's fingerprints were also on nearly all of them, Jeff Sessions, close quote. Steve Bannon, who has long indulged the worst strains of fear-mongering and even racism, told the reporters that Senator Sessions is a clearinghouse for policy and philosophy for the Trump administration. Now, under oath, Senator Sessions denied he was involved in creating the illegal Muslim ban executive order, and I'll take him at his word. But his views on this issue should come as no surprise to this committee. Senator Feinstein noted this, that in 2015, I offered a simple resolution that expressed the sense of the Senate. The United States must not bar individuals from entering into the United States based on their religion. That's pretty simple. All Democrats and most Republicans, including the chairman, voted in support of my resolution. Senator Sessions opposed it. I find that concerning. We need an Attorney General who would stand in the way of religious discrimination, not one that endorses it. And believe me, the anti-Muslim statements that are coming out of this administration create huge dangers to some of the best people in our country. Now, it's still unraveling what happened in Quebec City. I know Quebec City very well. My mother-in-law was born in Quebec City. We can drive there in a matter of just a few hours from our home in Vermont. My wife and I go there often. It's a beautiful city, a very safe city. I go there, I practice my French, which is sometimes understood, but it's a wonderful city, a peaceful city. Walked home from restaurants at midnight, just feeling totally safe. Now you have a Quebecer who had anti-Muslim tendencies, claims to be a Trump supporter, and committed a horrendous crime. Made even more horrendous because this is not a country where you see such things. Let's back off from this. Let's back off from this. My father told me stories when he was in his early teens, and my grandfather, Patrick J. Leahy, died as a stone carver in Barrie, Vermont. My father would go to seek work, and the signs were no Catholic need apply, no Irish need apply. Well, we've gone beyond that. We've gone beyond that. You wouldn't see such signs. But are they hidden signs that no Muslim need apply? That's not who we are, and that's not who we should be. So let me just conclude with this. We need an independent Attorney General, one who is committed to standing up for the constitutional and statutory rights of the disenfranchised, and stand up to a president who in these short days has already violated these rights. I don't think that describes Senator Sessions. So for these reasons, and I'll speak longer on the floor, I'm not confident of Senator Sessions being an Attorney General for all Americans. And so, Mr. Chairman, I must oppose this nomination. I thank you for having this open day.
Thank you.
I say no to Jeff Sessions, no to hatred, no to racism, no to the ban on refugees. Wait, come on, go out, but you don't need to drag me. I've got a hip replacement. I'm 70 years old and I can make it out on my own. But no to racism, no to hate, no to Jeff Sessions, no to the ban on refugees. No to Jeff Sessions.
Those of you on my side of the aisle that have asked me to intervene when speeches get too long, I'm not going to do that. First of all, Senator Leahy deserves, I think, special consideration because he's a longtime member of the committee, former chairman. And secondly, I've been in this committee for a long period of time, and usually, if you start raising issues, particularly on an important issue like this for the Attorney General of the United States, you end up spending more time arguing about it than you do if letting somebody speak. So I hope that you'll be tolerant of my not rapping the gavel every time somebody goes longer than you think they should.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you for what you said about me. I would note, however, that when I was chair, I always let both Republicans and Democrats speak as long as they want. Yep. And usually, Senator Sessions was the one who spoke the longest of any of us, as our colleagues on both sides of the aisle know, and I've never once asked them to stop.
Let me in good conscience, and I should have said exactly what you said, because you have been tolerant in all the years I've been on this committee, even with Chuck Grassley. Senator Graham.
Well, I support your decision. It's an important vote we're about to make, and take all the time you need to explain yourself. That's the way I look at these things. So with that in mind, I'll be quick. Bottom line is, I often disagree with President Trump more than I thought I would in the first 10 days, even though we generally see the big issues pretty much the same. But in this occasion, I find myself enthusiastically supporting his pick, and let me tell you why. I think Jeff Sessions is qualified. He has dedicated his life to the law before he got into the Senate. He's held responsible positions in the law, and I find him to be qualified. I think he's a good man. I actually like him. I disagree with him some, but I found him to be a good man who will fight to the death for what he believes. But if you can enlist him as an ally, he'll be there for you no matter the political consequences. What I've tried to do with my vote is to understand elections matter. I voted for Holder and Lynch because I thought they were qualified. A lot of colleagues on this side had a problem with Loretta Lynch because she believed that the executive order that President Obama issued about giving legal status to millions of illegal immigrants was okay. The courts wound up disagreeing with the president and Attorney General Lynch. And the reason I didn't vote against her, because to me it was pretty clearly obvious that he overreached, is I didn't expect her to come here and undercut her boss until the courts ruled. So about Jeff's relationship to President Trump, who do you expect him to pick? I mean, Senator Leahy was okay with JFK picking his brother. Well, you can't do that anymore. But who do you really expect the president to pick when it comes to something like this?
Answer that question.
I think.
Not a puppet like the one he has just selected.
Thank you.
I gotta tell you, I'm offended. Senator Leahy, I love your record. My father served the Department of Justice for a long time. I love this country, and I don't support.
Okay. So what was I saying? I was saying that Jeff Sessions is not the first person to be close to a president who advised a president who wound up being in the president's cabinet. Now, is this going to be a test for us all going forward? The fact that he's close to the president doesn't disqualify him at all. It makes perfect sense that somebody who's going to be president of the United States would pick somebody they know, they trust, and share their worldview. The law on terror. One of the main reasons I support Jeff is that I am tired of turning the war into a crime. Suleiman Abba Gaith was bin Laden's son-in-law that was captured, I think in Pakistan, I can't remember, a couple years ago. The son-in-law of bin Laden. He was put on a Navy ship for a couple of weeks, sent to New York and read his Miranda rights within 2 or 3 weeks of capture, not held as an enemy combatant, given a life sentence. And here's what I would suggest, that Jeff Sessions will stop that practice. That if we catch enemy combatants in the future, high-level al-Qaeda operatives, that we're not going to read them their Miranda rights, we're going to hold them under the law of war, interrogate them consistent with the laws of the land and the Geneva Convention, and try to gather intelligence to prevent the next attack. To my friends on the other side, the world is on fire. And somebody needs to come along and change our legal system so we can better defend ourselves. Only God knows how much intelligence we've lost in the last 4 years for an insane policy that treats an al-Qaeda terrorist as somebody who stole your car. As to Dianne Feinstein, I admire her greatly, but we've had this running debate about what an American citizen can and can't do. You can't join al-Qaeda and collaborate with them without consequences. Hamdi versus Rumsfeld, an American citizen captured in Afghanistan, was held as an enemy combatant. Justice O'Connor said we can hold even one of our own as an enemy combatant if, in fact, they have been collaborating with the enemy. And if you get to America, you don't get rewarded. Hopefully, to God, our laws work here, even on our homeland. So I think Jeff Sessions is right and Senator Feinstein is wrong. Bottom line about the job of Attorney General. I think Jeff will follow the law, no matter what his political opinions are. I have no doubt about that. As to Roe v. Wade, millions of Americans share that opinion. You mentioned a march where thousands of people came to protest President Trump. You were right. They were peaceful. Most of them were around my house. Very nice folks. You apparently missed the hundreds of thousands who took to the streets just a few days ago and had a sincerely held opinion that Roe v. Wade is bad law. So can you disagree with Roe v. Wade? Absolutely you can and still be Attorney General. At least I hope so, because millions of Americans do. But it is the law of the land, and there's a process to change it, and that will come from the courts. Now, Jeff Sessions, the man, this is the one that gets me the most, I guess. I expect criticism to come our way on both sides of the aisle. I voted against Senator Leahy's proposal of violence against women, even though I'm very supportive of the concept of protecting women, because I didn't agree with his construct. So I guess maybe I can't be Attorney General either. But Jeff the man, John Lewis. John Lewis, if anybody deserves to be called a modern hero, it is John Lewis. He literally risked his life to stand up against oppression at a time when a lot of people were not. That's something that he should be proud of and we should all revere. But he came before the committee and he made a pretty damning indictment of Senator Sessions. So here's what I'd ask my colleagues to do. Look underneath some of these criticisms and see what you find. This is the same man who basically accused Sarah Palin and John McCain of having Republican rallies that reminded him of George Wallace's time. Senator McCain and Governor Palin are sowing the seeds of hatred and division, and there's no need for this hostility in our political discourse. And he went on to say that George Wallace never threw a bomb, he never fired a gun, but he created the climate and conditions that encourage vicious attacks against innocent Americans who are simply trying to exercise their constitutional rights. Because of this atmosphere of hate, 4 little girls were killed on Sunday morning when a church was bombed in Birmingham, Alabama. I think most of you know I'm very close to Senator McCain. Senator McCain had a chapter in one of his books about John Lewis. And when asked about 3 people you would seek their counsel and advice when he was running for president, John Lewis was one of them. I don't think I've ever been more disappointed than when John Lewis said those things about my friend John McCain. It hurt him to his core. So I recognize Congressman Lewis's service to our country and his heroism, but there has been a pattern here, starting with Senator McCain, where I think his criticism is off base. The NAACP. Jeff Sessions says one of the greatest civil rights organizations in the history of the country. I think it's probably earned that title without any question. But when you look at where we're at today in 2017, 2016, every Republican on this side of the aisle gets a 25% at best on their scorecard. Now, you can blame them or you can blame us, but when you look under the criticism, it's more to do about Republican conservatives not being able to agree with the NAACP than it is about Jeff Sessions, the man. So what I want to let the committee know is that I voted for almost everybody that President Obama appointed, disagreeing with them almost everything. I never doubted any of these people were bad people because they disagreed with me. The one thing I can tell the United States of America, in my view, that Jeff Sessions is a Republican conservative who is a good, decent man who will follow the law as he sees it, will try to take the country down a different road than President Obama and his Attorney General, and that's what the whole election was about. You can't have it both ways. You can't lose the election and expect the government to represent your view of what we should be doing. The question is he qualified? Is he a decent, honorable man? And he's every bit as qualified and every bit as decent and honorable as Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch.
Thank you for the 7 minutes you took. Go ahead, Senator Durbin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me say at the outset that this exercise, this responsibility in the Senate Judiciary Committee is one which I perhaps didn't anticipate when I ran for the Senate. But so often we're called on to judge other people, to stand in judgment of people who are seeking positions as judges, U.S. attorneys, U.S. marshals, even cabinet members. And it really puts to a test each one of us in terms of trying to be fair and be honest and to anticipate what will happen if we entrust that person with a special responsibility. It is complicated even more when it involves a colleague, someone you've served with, in my case for 20 years with Senator Sessions. I believe that I can take the measure of that man as he can take it of me, because we've heard one another's speeches to the point that we can give one another speeches. I certainly understand his philosophy and understand his values, political values. That is making this even more challenging. I would like to make one comment about Senator Graham's statement about John Lewis. Senator Graham, I may not agree with everything that John Lewis has said. I certainly, if there was any conclusion about Senator McCain relative to his position on race or such, I would agree with you completely. I don't believe that he should be assigned any title that questions his commitment to racial equality. But I also believe that John Lewis paid in blood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for his right to speak his opinion, even if I disagree with it, even if you do. And I think that's what you said, and I respect you for saying that. But when he was dismissed by the president in a tweet for his lifetime of commitment to civil rights, I found that to be below the belt and unacceptable. Day 12. This is day 12 of the Trump presidency. It is hard to believe or imagine that it's only been 12 days. As Senator Feinstein has said, this new president has issued 6 executive orders and 10 presidential memoranda, wide-ranging in the issues and subjects that they address. But certainly, they should give us pause, because if in 12 days this is what we have, what can we anticipate for the next 3 years, 11 months, and 16 days? We ought to understand that this is not just a hearing on a nomination, an important nomination. This is a constitutional moment. This is a constitutional moment and a challenge to us to envision what the next Attorney General will be facing in the remaining 3 years and 11 months with this president. Back in my youth, dubious about the wisdom of the Vietnam War, I marched around and carried signs, and so did a lot of others. And I found myself, when the Trump cabinet was being proposed, curiously gravitating toward Marine Corps generals, hoping that there'll be more and more of them in the cabinet. And my reason? I believe in the case of General Pettus, and certainly in the case of General Kennedy, they are men of proven allegiance to this country, proven integrity, who at that critical moment when they have to stand up for what is right will do it or will walk away from the job. We can expect nothing less of people who serve this country, either in our military or in our cabinet, and we can certainly expect nothing less when it comes to the Attorney General of the United States of America. I join with the statement made by Senator Leahy about Sally Yates. For more than 2 decades as a prosecutor and a person I work closely with in the Department of Justice, she is a person of character and integrity. What she did yesterday in issuing the statement saying that she could not, in good conscience, understanding the laws of the land and the Constitution, enforce the executive orders of President Trump when it came to refugees and immigration, that was consistent with what we have seen in attorney generals of the past. They characterized it this morning as the Monday night massacre. Students of history will know the parallel. It was a Saturday night massacre that led to the dismissal of Archibald Cox as a special prosecutor in the Department of Justice, because he, in following the dictate or decision of Judge Sirica, called on President Nixon to disclose information and tapes that could be damning in that Watergate investigation. President Nixon chose instead to fire him, or at least to order the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, to fire him. In response, not only Elliot Richardson, but Bill Ruckelshaus, the Deputy Attorney General, and Archibald Cox resigned. That was a key constitutional moment at that time, and decisions were made by people of integrity to stand up for the law and Constitution of this land, even if it meant walking away from the office that they'd been asked to hold. We can expect nothing less. Now, Mr. Chairman, when Senator Sessions came to see me in my office, as he visited most of us, I was heartened by one thing. He didn't come in and tell me that he was the new Jeff Sessions, that he had reinvented himself for this position. He didn't try to do that, and I respect him for that because we know one another quite well, politically and in some degree personally. So when he makes a statement when asked about the executive orders that he was not involved in the executive orders on refugees and immigration, I have to really question that. Based on what we've already heard from both Senator Feinstein and Senator Leahy, this article in the Washington Post suggests that he was involved. Indirectly, but definitely involved. The directives, as these writers said, bore Trump's name but another man's fingerprints, were also on nearly all of them, Jeff Sessions. An Alabama Senate backbencher, in this article's opinion, has become a singular power in Washington. Sessions' ideology, the article says, is driven by a visceral aversion to what he calls soulless globalism, a term used on the extreme right to convey a perceived threat to the United States from free trade, international alliances, and the immigration of non-whites. We know that it was his former senior policy advisor, Steve Miller, his confidant, who was mentored by Senator Sessions, who was credited with authoring these executive orders on refugees and immigrants. We also know that the Deputy Chief of Staff, Rick Dearborn, was formerly Senator Sessions' longtime Chief of Staff in the Senate. And we know as well, as has been stated, the mastermind behind President Trump's incendiary brand of populism, Chief Strategist Stephen Bannon, has for years been promoting Senator Sessions on his Breitbart website. It is said that Jared Kushner, in this article, the president's son-in-law and senior advisor, considers Senator Sessions a savant. In an email in response to a request from the Washington Post, Steve Bannon described Sessions as the clearinghouse for policy and philosophy in Trump's administration, saying he and the senator are at the center of Trump's pro-America movement and the global nationalist phenomena. The president has referred to Senator Jeff Sessions as legendary. To suggest that he did not have influence or impact on the issuance of these executive orders is misleading. He had indirect influence at the highest levels. And let's speak for a moment about those orders, because I think they get to the heart of why this nomination is so critically important today. It is often said that those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. And I recently learned something I didn't know and should have known about the administration of Franklin Roosevelt during World War II. I admire that man for what he did for America and how he led us through that trying war. But I also came to learn in this book, 1944, by Jay Winnick, a former Senate staffer, I might add, that the policies of the FDR administration when it came to refugees and immigrants were not admirable and certainly not right. A man by the name of Broderick Long served as a major advisor in the administration. Breckinridge Long, I'm sorry, served as a major advisor in the FDR administration. A controversial man, Long's, and I quote from the Winnick book, Long's unwavering belief was that all refugees were potential spies and constitute a menace to the U.S. national security. In slur after slur, Long made it clear that he thought ill of virtually anyone who didn't have his social values or came from his social class. Didn't think much of liberals, disliked Catholics, New Yorkers, Eastern Europeans, and Mr. Long despised Jews most of all. To run afoul of his anti-immigration hysteria in those days often came with a cost. He even interpreted the desire to allow British refugee children into the United States as an enormous psychosis on the part of the American people. Hard to imagine that in the FDR administration, that was the feeling. And what was the result? We know the story of the SS St. Louis, a ship with 900 trying to escape Nazi Germany, came to the United States and was turned away. We know that several hundred of those potential refugees perished in the Holocaust. And that was a decision made for which many of us are saddened and, in many ways, hurt. So where are we today? We're in a different America, an America which, after World War II, and the fact that we systematically excluded Jewish refugees during World War II, we're in America that views refugees, at least until now, in a much different way. Think about the hundreds of thousands of Cuban refugees that we have allowed into the United States, proud that they are our fellow citizens in this country. They were leaving a regime headed by Fidel Castro, a friend of our mortal enemy in the Cold War, the Soviet Union. And as they came to the United States, did we do extreme vetting? No. We said, if you're looking for freedom, this is where you'll find it. They have become an integral part of America, an important part of America, and they are represented here in the United States Senate by 3 different colleagues. Think about those who were Jewish in the Soviet Union, who wanted to escape persecution. Did we say, stop? You're Russians, and Russians are our enemies. We're going to put you through extreme vetting. No. We welcomed over 100,000 of them to the United States, and thank God we did, showing again who we are and what we stand for. It happened after Vietnam. It happened after the fall of Yugoslavia. It happened time and again as we set an example for the world when it came to refugees. And now, where are we today? Because of the executive orders of this president, he has called into question over a half-century commitment to accepting refugees from around the world. People who have been victims of persecution and genocide and terrorism and war are to be excluded. And is it because of a real threat to our country? Exactly how many Syrian refugees have been accused of terrorism in the United States of America? None. None. Not one. And when you do the lengthy history of 40 years plus of all of the millions of refugees who come in this country, you could count on one hand those who have done us wrong. And they were let into the country long before the vetting we now have in place. It is disgraceful. The language that was used during the campaign by candidate Donald Trump when it came to refugees, disgraceful. I met with these Syrian refugee families, and many have. I welcome those who are critical of them to take a few minutes and meet them and hear their stories. And you will come to realize what is at stake here. It is our reputation in the world. And when President Donald Trump offers these executive orders, authored by Senator Sessions' former staffers, of course we have questions, and we should.
This is very interesting.
This, to me, gets to the heart of why we are having this hearing and why we are spending this time. Since World War II, we have tried to set a standard for the world. I'm saddened that 12 days into this administration, President Trump is trying to redefine America in the eyes of the world. Much is said in earlier comments about Senator Sessions' work on criminal justice reform. I have a unique and personal perspective on that. Senator Sessions and I have disagreed on a lot of issues. There was one, though, that we tried to work together on, and we achieved something. I've cast thousands of votes as a member of the House and the Senate. I am proud of almost all of them, but I'm embarrassed by one. And I'll tell you what it was, because it should be a matter of record here as we debate this nomination of Senator Sessions. I'm turning to a book here called White Rage by Carol Anderson, who teaches at Emory. I gave a copy of this book to Senator Sessions when he came by my office because I was hoping he might get a chance to read it. Dr. Anderson talks about 1986 when Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which stipulated mandatory sentencing and emphasized punishment over treatment. It created a 100-to-1 disparity in sentencing between crack and cocaine based on the myth that the cheap narcotic rock was more addictive than its powder form. I remember those days. I was in the House. It was also the time when a spectacular basketball player from Maryland, Lynn Bias, overdosed on cocaine and died. At the same time, we were told there's a new form of cocaine on the street. It is dirt cheap, it is lethal, it is addictive, and if a pregnant woman uses it, she's going to cause incalculable harm to a fetus. And so I voted. Sad to say, I voted for this Anti-Drug Abuse Act, the 100-to-1 sentencing. Over years, I came to realize what a terrible mistake I'd made as we filled our prisons across America, primarily with African Americans, for interminably long sentences under the mandatory sentencing of that law. So I set out to do something about it in the Senate. I introduced a bill that brought that disparity from 100-to-1 to 1-to-1, reflecting the reality that there was no difference between powder cocaine and crack cocaine, and they should be sentenced accordingly. At the time, Senator Graham, who stepped away, had a measure which reduced it from 100-to-1 to 10-to-1. Senator Sessions and measure to reduce it to 20-to-1. Each of those was an improvement, and I finally came down to a direct negotiation with Senator Sessions. Could he and I agree on a number to bring some justice to this unjust situation? I can't tell you how we reached it, but we did. We reached the number 18, and that was the Fair Sentencing Act. And it said that the disparity would be reduced from 100-to-1 to 18-to-1. The net impact of that affected thousands of federal prisoners who were given a chance to have their prison sentences under this old 100-to-1 law reviewed individually by judges and prosecutors to see if they'd be allowed to be freed. Many were. We saved thousands of prison years in the federal system because of the bill that I co-sponsored with Senator Sessions. It passed this committee, it passed the floor of the Senate by a voice vote, and the same thing in the Senate in both the House Judiciary Committee, in the House Judiciary Committee and on the floor, and it was signed in an almost private ceremony by President Obama, which Senator Sessions and I attended. I then turned to Senator Sessions and said, but what of those who are now serving time who can't, under our law as written, have the right to appeal their unjust sentence? Will you join me in a letter to the Sentencing Commission encouraging them to give these individual prisoners a chance? And he said no. I then asked him to join me with Senator Grassley in the Criminal Justice Reform Bill, which for the almost 5,000 remaining prisoners, 100-to-1, they would get that individual consideration. And he said no. So there was that shining moment when we worked together to bring it to 18-to-1. But little or no follow-through when it came to what I considered to be a consistent approach in dealing with justice in criminal sentencing. When Senator Sessions came by my office, we talked about a lot of things, but I talked especially about one prisoner who I invited to his hearing. His name is Alton Mills. He's from the city of Chicago. He made a terrible mistake as a young man in Chicago. He got involved in street-level sales of drugs. He was arrested several times, and the first 2 times did not spend a day in jail, but the third time, on a 3 strikes and you're out sentencing, at the age of 24, was given a life sentence for the sale of drugs. Fortunately, in December of 2015, President Obama commuted Alton Mills' sentence. At that time, he had served 22 years in federal prison. Under the Obama administration, Justice Department prosecutors were directed that for low-level offenders like Alton, they should use their discretion and not seek enhancements like the one that led to Alton's life sentence. Senator Sessions, unfortunately, strongly opposed those guidelines. When it came to clemency, Senator Sessions has fiercely criticized President Obama's commutations. He said, and I quote, those commutations were issued in a, quote, unprecedented, reckless manner. And in his words, Senator Sessions said, so-called low-level nonviolent offenders simply do not exist in the federal system. What I said at the hearing, I'll say today, Senator Sessions, meet Alton Mills and tell me that these low-level nonviolent offenders don't exist in our federal system. When it came to changing the law that led to Alton's sentence, Senator Sessions led the opposition. To sum it up, he has staunchly opposed using prosecutorial discretion, clemency, and legislation to address the plight of thousands of people like Alton Mills still serving unjust sentences in federal prisons around the country. That doesn't leave any options for bringing about a just outcome, and it's one of the major concerns I have as he seeks this office of Attorney General. On the issue of civil rights, I feel this with special intensity. I was fortunate to chair a subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Human Rights Committee on this Judiciary Committee. And watching the passage of state laws imposing voter IDs and reducing the opportunities for early voting, I took this subcommittee on the road. We went to Ohio and Florida. We brought in election officials from both political parties, put them under oath, and asked them point blank, what were the incidents of voter fraud in your states which led your state legislatures to change the law and make it more difficult for people to vote in your states? Without exception, they said there were none. How many people were prosecuted for voter fraud in Ohio or Florida before you started demanding voter IDs? Virtually none. This effort to suppress votes continues across America, sponsored by some of the strongest special interest groups in our country. The decision that was made by the Supreme Court, which changed the Voting Rights Act, was one which was applauded by Senator Sessions. It took away the authority which we had as a federal government to police these state laws and make sure that they didn't discriminate against people who are seeking the right to vote across our country. I listened to Senator Sessions say that it was good for the South that the law was changed by the Supreme Court. I have no particular animus against anyone in any part of our country. Wherever there is an effort to suppress votes, wherever there is voter discrimination, we need to stand up and speak out, whatever state may be involved, north, south, east, or west. I do not have confidence that Senator Sessions, as Attorney General, will do that. And that, to me, is a troubling thing to say, but one that I'm sorry to say is a reality.
I know.
I could go through so many other issues that have been noted here. His views on torture, his views and votes on women's health, the views on VAWA. I agree with Senator Grassley to this extent. There isn't a one of us that hasn't been involved in a campaign where somebody took a vote and twisted it into something that we never believed to be our true position. But consistently, time and time again, Senator Sessions has voted against protection for crime victims, LGBT victims, women who are victims, Native Americans, and so many others. When Senator Leahy offered his basic resolution in this committee on religion, we had a stark but simple choice. Were we going to stand behind the Constitution, which has for more than 2 centuries spelled out in the simplest terms, but the most important terms, our position on religion? Everyone on the committee but 4 voted with Senator Leahy in a bipartisan vote. One of those 4 is a man who now seeks to be the Attorney General of the United States. We are now dealing with a ban on refugees and immigrants. We are dealing with a ban which even the president has acknowledged on Christian broadcasting shows preference for one religion over another. That is inconsistent with the values of this country, and I have no confidence that Senator Sessions will confront him with that grim reality. I'd like to call the attention of the committee to the testimony of Michael Mukasey, who was brought as a witness for Senator Sessions and testified under oath about his experience as Attorney General of the United States. I did not vote for him because of his position on torture. But I respectfully tried to ask him questions. And I went to the question about the Russian involvement in this last election campaign and asked him specifically about the FBI investigation of this Russian involvement in the campaign. Michael Mukasey, with a brevity of words, said, "The FBI works for the Attorney General." As Attorney General, Mr. Mukasey, did you have the authority to stop an FBI investigation? Yes. So many of us wrote a set of questions to Senator Sessions afterwards. Will you use your power as Attorney General to impede an investigation of the Russian involvement in this last presidential election, or even stop such an investigation? Do you know what his answer was? He said he did not have the time to read the unclassified intelligence memo, which we have all read, that summarized this Russian involvement. That is either willful blindness or willful ignorance on his part, not to realize the gravity of this. What happened in this presidential election on Election Day was a day that will live in cyber infamy. This was an attempt by a foreign power with values inconsistent with the United States to change the outcome of our election, specifically to benefit the current president and to defeat Hillary Clinton. Is that worth an investigation? I came to the Senate 20 years ago, as did Senator Sessions. And when I arrived in the Senate as a member of the Government Affairs Committee, we were welcomed into a hearing chaired by Fred Thompson of Tennessee, Ranking Member John Glenn, and the question before us 20 years ago was the involvement of the government of China in the Clinton-Gore campaign. We spent months in public hearings on that question. Because of some ham-handed decision by the Clinton-Gore campaign, God forbid, to accept campaign checks from Buddhist nuns, there was nothing that pointed to the involvement of the Chinese government, but we went on for months. And months later, formal reports were issued. And yet, look at the response of the Republican majority now to the suggestion that the Russians were involved in this presidential campaign, a fact which every major intelligence agency of this country has confirmed. Do you see the same kind of anger and commitment and excitement? Not at all. They've dismissed it with a boys will be boys shrug. The only hope we have to ever get to the truth of this is a thorough FBI investigation. And now we are being asked to appoint an Attorney General who will not give us his word that he would not stop such an investigation or impede it. That, to me, disqualifies him when it comes to this important responsibility. And so I come to this conclusion, despite my personal relationships, my working with Senator Sessions, my respect for his family, that he is the wrong person for this job. We need someone with unquestioned strength, values, and integrity, who at that critical constitutional moment is prepared to stand up to this president or any president and say, you are wrong, and if you insist on doing this, I will resign. I cannot picture this man who has been described by the Trump advisors as a savant and legendary, having the will or determination to do that. And for that reason, I oppose the nomination of Jeff Sessions as Attorney General of the United States.
Senator Corner.
Mr. Chairman, I remember Senator Specter, when he was chairman of this committee a few years ago, made the observation, thank goodness we don't try people in the courts of law based on the sort of flimsy and incompetent and hearsay evidence that we use in order to make public policy arguments here in the Senate. I guess you could call them alternative facts. Our friends on the other side seem to be upset about the outcome of the election on November 8th. I guess you could say they're going through the stages of grief, denial, anger. I think that's where they are right now. They haven't yet come to bargaining, depression, or acceptance. So they're angry. That's their right. But they don't have, I think, the freedom or the right to make up or to characterize motivation in the way they have, either of the nominee or the administration. You know, 37 Democrats voted for the omnibus appropriation bill in 2016. The reason I bring that up is because it had a travel ban. A travel ban from people from Iraq, Syria, and other countries that were related to or involved in international terrorism. So 37 Democrats voted for a travel ban from some of the very same countries now that they are decrying, that is the subject of the executive order signed by President Trump. Now, I'm glad General Kelly, Secretary Kelly, revised that to exclude legal permanent residents unless there's derogatory information that would justify that. I think that's the right thing to do. But the faux outrage of some of the same people who voted for a travel ban from some of these same countries is a little hard to take at face value. One of the reasons why the election turned out the way it did on November the 8th, in my view, is public backlash over a failure of the Obama administration, and particularly the Holder and Lynch Justice Departments, to simply enforce the laws, whether there are immigration laws, where they prefer to, we kill terrorists rather than capture them and question them, claiming that somehow to be a morally superior position. We know that Attorney General Holder, of course, was the first, I believe, in history, Attorney General ever to be held in contempt of Congress for failing to comply with our oversight responsibilities. And now the idea that Deputy Attorney General Yates has somehow engaged in a Watergate-style act of political courage, what she should have done if she couldn't do her job was to quit, to resign. That's right. To read this letter where she acknowledges that the Office of Legal Counsel reviewed the legality of the executive order and said it was lawful on its face and properly drafted, for her then to take the position that it was her prerogative then to say the United States would not defend the executive order in a court of law is completely unacceptable. So her choice was to either do her job or to resign, and if she wouldn't do either one, I believe President Trump was entirely within his rights to fire her. And it's really a shame. I voted for her confirmation. She's had a long and distinguished career, and I hope she's not remembered for this blemish on that long and distinguished career, but for the good that she's done. So I said during the hearing on Senator Sessions that it really is surreal to sit here and listen to colleagues characterize somebody who we know personally and we served with for many years. In the case of the Democratic whip, for 20 years. I've been here 15 years and served alongside of Senator Sessions, as many of us have, for a long, long time. So this isn't just a question of what his record is. We know his record. We know his resume. But as I said at his hearing, I said, we know his heart. We know him to be a good and decent man. And the idea that because he voted for or against different policies as a legislator, that he can't keep his oath to enforce the law is preposterous. I've had the great privilege of serving in 3 different departments of government, as a judge for 13 years, in the executive branch for 4 years as Attorney General, and now in the legislature. We all understand, I mean, since the founding of this country, what the differences are between the branches of government and what the responsibilities are of people who hold those offices. I have every confidence that Jeff Sessions, as the Attorney General, will enforce the law of the land. And all the political and policy differences that our colleagues have on the other side, I think, really is more a reflection of their disdain and their upset over the fact that President Trump won the election and their preferred candidate did not. But the scene was vastly different back in 2009 when President Obama was sworn into office. President Obama was not my choice for president, but he was my president. And he selected a cabinet, and we confirmed 7 of them on the first day of his office. But now the tables are turned. Our Democratic colleagues have decided that resistance is their chosen response. Well, I hope they get beyond the anger that they're currently feeling, and I hope they work their way to accepting the verdict of the American voter and the American people. And yes, Hillary Clinton won the popular election, but that doesn't make a hill of beans worth of difference. It's the electoral vote, and they know that, but of course they keep bringing that up as if that somehow delegitimizes the victory of President Trump and Vice President Pence. So I hope at some point our Democratic colleagues will get past their anger and come to accept the verdict of the American people and work with us. This boycotting of markups like we saw in the Finance Committee, where we had 2 cabinet nominees that couldn't be even voted on because our Democratic colleagues boycotted the markup, have denied President Trump 2 more of his cabinet members. Our Democratic colleagues like to point to the fact that there have been some missteps at the early stages of this administration, but one of the reasons I suspect is because he doesn't have his team in place. And so they continue to criticize them, even though they deny them the very team they need in order to do their job. So, Mr. Chairman, I will enthusiastically support the nomination of Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. I believe he will restore the rule of law to a Justice Department that's been ruled by the political arm of the previous administration for too long. And I do believe that just as I believe that President Trump is a response to people's decision not to see a 3rd term for President Obama's policies in a Clinton administration, that they see Attorney General Sessions as an antidote to the politicalization of the Department of Justice under Attorney General Holder and Lynch. Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to express my appreciation and join my colleagues in thanking you for giving us the time that we need on this tremendously important topic. I would say that there are few issues or votes that we will address more important than this one. We all know, most of us having been involved in practicing law and many of us in prosecuting, how significant a decision it is who will serve in this role, because truly the Attorney General of the United States is more than just another law enforcement officer, more than just another lawyer. He must be the legal conscience for this nation, and he must have the independence and integrity to stand up and speak out when his boss, the President of the United States, is in violation of the law. And that is the tradition of the Department of Justice. It is the tradition that Sally Yates upheld and demonstrated when she stood up and spoke out to the President of the United States. The analogy has been made to the Saturday night massacre during the Watergate scandal, but there also is a comparison to what James Comey did when he was in the Department of Justice, and he was faced with an executive order that he regarded as illegal, and he similarly said that he could not and would not enforce it. And he went to the White House, was asked by then President George Bush to come there. And as a result, President Bush modified his stand. What is so tragically apparent here is that President Trump is unwilling to consider the legal reasons that Sally Yates stood her ground and why that position now more than ever demands someone who is willing to stand for the rule of law and for constitutional principles. It isn't only Sally Yates who thinks there are constitutional questions about these executive orders. 4 courts all around the country, judges independent of each other and of any of us and any political organization, have also held that they are unenforceable. And the reason they're unenforceable is that they violate our fundamental constitutional standards and principles, our values as Americans. We're not here to debate the constitutionality or legality or wisdom of those orders, but the action that Sally Yates took is in the highest traditions of the Department of Justice, and my fear and concern is that Senator Sessions will be unable or unwilling to stand up and speak out and serve as a champion of those principles. He has to be more than just someone who follows the law, as he promised us on numerous occasions during his testimony that he would do. When faced with a difficult question, he told us that he would follow the law. But the Attorney General of the United States has to be an advocate, a zealous champion of constitutional rights and liberties that are threatened every day in this country, now more than ever. The President of the United States is traditionally accorded a high level of deference in assembling his cabinet because cabinet members are accountable to him, but they are also, more importantly, accountable to the American people. That's our task here today, to assure that accountability. No cabinet member has a greater impact on the day-to-day lives of Americans than the Attorney General of the United States. He has sweeping authority. And any of us who have served in the Department of Justice know that authority. Any of us who have served as prosecutors know that authority. Because the power to charge someone with a crime, the power to impose orders that restrict liberty, the power to protect the innocent from unfounded charges that may shatter their lives, even if they are acquitted, is a power of awesome consequence. And as the chief federal prosecutor in Connecticut, the United States attorney for several years, reporting to the Attorney General of the United States, and then as Attorney General of Connecticut, I fought alongside and sometimes against the Attorney General of the United States. Robert Jackson once said, and Senator Sessions, in fact, paraphrased it during his testimony, that the job of the United States Attorney General is not to convict, but assure that justice is done. That's a sacred obligation, and he must be independent. That's an ideal, not always realized, in attorneys general, but it is the goal that we ought to strive to reach, because his decisions must supersede politics. In most cases, there is no recourse to overrule his decisions without political interference. He has that power as the nation's lawyer, not the president's counsel. The president has his own counsel in the White House. The Attorney General of the United States, as Senator Leahy said so well, represents the people of the United States. And this job requires a singular level of integrity and a nonpartisan but passionate devotion to the rule of law. We've seen over the past few days how destructive anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant orders can give rise to violations of the rule of law. The bias and fear and hatred indicated by these orders are antithetical to our constitutional rights and our values. Our nation is a nation of immigrants. All of us, all of our families have an immigrant story. The orders harm mainly children and families fleeing violence and oppression and seek refuge in this country. We are stronger because we are a beacon of hope and refuge to such children and families. They have helped to shape and build our country, and this order will make us less safe. These orders provide a recruiting tool to ISIS by convincing young people who may be tempted to join their ranks that, in fact, this country is engaged in a war against Islam, which is utterly and totally untrue. But it weakens us in a deeper moral sense. It is wrong. It's wrong for this great country, devoted and founded on the ideals of welcoming people, seeking that beacon of hope and protection, of opportunity. The rule of law protects us from these kinds of harm. And the rule of law protecting us from criminality within the United States and the threat of extremism is best served by encouraging people of other religions and faiths to come forward with information that will, in fact, enable effective policing. We have seen over these last days impartial and steadfast judges in districts around the country upholding individual constitutional rights, despite strong pressure from the President of the United States. And we've seen just last night what it truly means to serve at the Department of Justice and represent the American people and the Constitution. The Watergate era demonstrates what happens when the rule of law is compromised. And my fear is that we are threatened with a return to that era, when the Department of Justice is no longer an independent authority acting on behalf of the American people, but just another enabler of the President's ongoing efforts to substitute hateful demagoguery for legal and ethical responsibilities. And that's why the nomination before this committee is so important. Now more than ever, the Attorney General must be a person of independence and integrity and stand for the impartial rule of law. I have reviewed Senator Sessions' full record, his testimony, his responses, and his lack of responses to the follow-up questions that my colleagues and I sent to him. And I respectfully say that I cannot support his nomination. At his confirmation hearing, Senator Sessions simply said that he would follow the law, that he would enforce the law, that he would respect the law. But he must be a leader, not just a follower. At the hearing and in their public comments afterward, our Republican colleagues have worked to make the case that Senator Sessions has no personal animosity toward minority groups. And I have no doubt that's the case. But Senator Sessions' personal feelings are not what's at issue here. In protecting constitutional rights and liberties and pursuing justice, he must be a champion. And Senator Sessions' record demonstrates a hostility and antipathy, in fact, even strong opposition to civil rights and voting rights, women's health care and privacy rights, anti-discrimination measures, religious freedom safeguards. He has prided himself on vociferous opposition to comprehensive immigration reform legislation, a measure that passed the United States Senate with 68 votes, a bipartisan majority. And he has opposed a criminal justice reform bill that has attracted a group of 25 co-sponsors, Republicans as well as Democrats. He even split with the majority of his own party to vote against reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, demonstrating in the reasons that he articulated antipathy to important elements of these rights and protection. He opposed hate crime prohibition. Senator Sessions' views and positions have been out of the mainstream, and there is nothing in his record, including his testimony before this committee, that indicates he will be the constitutional champion that all of us, Republicans and Democrats, value in the Attorney General. Speaking truth to power is important when it comes to conflicts of interest. President Trump's vast business holdings, and he has repeatedly refused to divest himself from them, present an unprecedented threat of conflict of interest. Should conflicts arise, the Attorney General must be willing to maintain impartiality, including appointing a special counsel or independent prosecutor, if necessary. We can all imagine scenarios when this step might be necessary, and to commit broadly to these principles is necessary from the next Attorney General. And yet, when I asked Senator Sessions about enforcement of cases against illegal conflicts of interest involving the President and his family, such as violations of the Emoluments Clause and the Stock Act, he equivocated. When I asked him about appointing a special counsel to investigate criminal wrongdoing at Deutsche Bank, which is owed more than $300 million by President Trump, he equivocated. When I asked him about the investigation of Russian hacking, he equivocated. Senator Durbin has rightly pointed out the failing that that equivocation represents. His answers to follow-up questions have been no better. These answers give me no confidence that he will be the independent, non-political enforcer against conflicts of interest and official self-enrichment that the nation needs at a moment when this administration faces ethical and legal controversy that are unprecedented in scope and scale, as is the President's wealth. Senator Sessions' record over many years failed to demonstrate his core convictions and commitments necessary in the next Attorney General. He has failed to be that unshakable ethical voice that we need at this moment and that is necessary to protect and defend our Constitution. Back in 1986, the Judiciary Committee rejected Senator Sessions' nomination to a federal judgeship due to remarks he made and actions he took in a position of public trust as United States Attorney in Alabama. My judgment about this nomination is not based primarily on his record before then. It is on his record since. On voting rights, Senator Sessions has often condoned barriers to Americans exercising their franchise. He has been a leading opponent of provisions in the Voting Rights Act designed to assure that African Americans can vote in places like his home state of Alabama, which has a unique history of racial segregation, and he's advocated for needlessly restrictive and draconian voter ID laws, citing utterly debunked threats of rampant voter fraud as an excuse for curtailing the real and legitimate rights of entire groups of voters. He regarded a court decision in Shelby as good news in striking down some of those key provisions. On privacy, Senator Sessions has passionately opposed this long-standing American right, which is enshrined in 5 decades of Supreme Court precedent. It protects women's health care and personal decision involving reproductive rights. At a time when those rights face unprecedented assault, he has continued to condemn Roe v. Wade and the many court decisions upholding that case. Equally disturbing, Senator Sessions is supported by groups like Operation Rescue, who defend the murder of doctors and the vilification and criminalization of women. With him as Attorney General, American women would understandably feel less secure in these rights. On religious freedom, Senator Sessions has advocated for using a religious test to determine which immigrants can enter this country. He was an advocate of a ban on Muslims coming into the country during the past campaign. When this issue arose in committee, Senator Sessions was the only senator to argue forcefully for religious tests and against principles of religious liberty that have animated our republic since its founding. With Senator Sessions as
Senator Blumenthal, could you pull the microphone a little closer to you?
It's hard to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you can
The mic keeps popping up.
I'm happy to start over.
bend it down like this. Bend the end of it down.
It won't
Thank
stay.
you. I think I may have been more persuasive when you couldn't hear me than
No, see?
on citizenship. Senator Sessions has called for abolishing a time-honored tradition that dates back to Reconstruction. Birthright citizenship is the distinctly American concept that anyone born on our soil is a citizen of this country. We don't exclude people from citizenship based on nationality of their parents or grandparents. Senator Sessions disagrees, a position that most other Republicans think is extreme. With Senator Sessions as Attorney General, the Trump administration would be encouraged in attempting to deport American citizens who have raised families and spent their entire lives here. Senator Sessions declined my invitation at his nomination hearing to exercise moral and legal leadership and demonstrate his resolve to serve as this nation's legal conscience. He refused to reject the possibility of using information voluntarily provided by DACA applicants to deport them and their families. As a matter of fundamental fairness and due process, as I said at the time, when a dreamer provides information to our government after being invited to come out of the shadows, this information should not be used to deport that person. As Senator Sessions, as Attorney General, that sense of legal conscience would be lacking. On issues of discrimination and equal protection, Senator Sessions has publicly opposed marriage equality, claiming, I quote, that it weakens marriage, end quote, and even tried to eliminate protections for LGBT Americans in the Runaway and Homeless Youth Trafficking Prevention Act. He has repeatedly voted against steps to enhance enforcement against hate crimes violent assaults involving bigotry or bias based on race, religion, or sexual orientation. He even defended President Trump's shocking admission on video of his pattern of engaging in sexual assault. Senator Sessions has said that public individuals may be fairly judged by assessing who supports them. But he is backed by groups with ties to white supremacists. He accepted an award and repeated campaign donations from groups whose founder openly promotes the goal of maintaining a, quote, European American majority, end quote, in our society. Neither award nor many other important parts of Senator Sessions' history was reported on the questionnaire he prepared for the Judiciary Committee. And I gave Senator Sessions an opportunity at his hearing and in follow-up questions to repudiate these groups, hate groups, and racist individuals who have endorsed his nomination and supported him in the past. Instead, he doubled down, saying that a man who has accused African Americans of excessive criminality and American Muslims of extensive ties to terrorism was, quote, a most brilliant individual, end quote. So I reached my decision to oppose this nomination with regret, because Senator Sessions is a colleague and a friend to all of us. Indeed, I have come to like him and respect him, as I think has been observed by others of my colleagues, through a number of shared experiences and common causes. He and I support law enforcement professionals. They serve our communities and nation with dedication and courage, and they deserve and need our support. He and I believe that individual corporate criminal culpability should be pursued more vigorously, and I have talked to him privately as well as in the course of his testimony about the need for prosecuting corporate wrongdoing, because ultimately jail and individual responsibility are the most effective deterrent against white-collar crime. But this job, this decision, this responsibility are different. Here, my disagreements with Senator Sessions stem from bedrock constitutional principles. And while I could envision deferring to presidential authority and supporting him for other positions, my objection to his nomination relates specifically to this particular essential, all-important, powerful job. At this historic moment, there's no doubt, and can be no doubt, about the responsibilities and immense power of the Attorney General of the United States to be true to our values and our rule of law, and to make sure that the President is never above the law and never thinks he is above the law. Reviewing his record, I cannot assure the people of Connecticut or the country that Jeff Sessions would be a vigorous champion of these rights and liberties, and therefore I stand in opposition to his nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before Senator Lee, we have a vote in 20 minutes, so I'd like to kind of plan for the rest of this committee meeting. Number one, I would like to keep the meeting going during, so Republicans, I hope, will take turns with me to go vote and chair the meeting. And then, so Republicans generally have spoken shorter times than Democrats. So if Senator Lee speaks about the usual time of Republicans and Democrats start on a 30-minute speech, you may want to think about letting a Republican speak ahead of you. The other thing is that we've had the 2-hour rule used against the Finance Committee. No Democrats showed up at the Finance Committee so that the Secretary of HHS could be voted out. I hope the way I've been running this committee, we would have the fairness on the part of the minority, let this committee go beyond two 2 o'clock so we can finish today. If there's a reason to invoke the 2-hour rule, then I would suggest that just as soon as it can be conveniently called in the morning, we will have a meeting of the committee, and I will call for a roll call vote just as soon as we get a quorum, because I think everybody knows how everybody's going to vote, and out of the fairness that I've given to everybody to speak as long as they want to, and that's legitimate. That's the way we're going to run the committee. That's the way Senator Leahy ran the committee. Then I hope we can get done today yet. So, Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like many on this committee who have spoken today, I have disagreed with Senator Sessions a lot. In fact, I've been here 6 years. I'm just starting my second term. I was thinking I may well have disagreed with Senator Sessions as often as I have disagreed with any other single member of this committee, probably more than I've disagreed with any other Republican serving on this committee. Shortly after I arrived in the Senate 6 years ago, we had some of our first disagreements as we were dealing with the reauthorization of the USA Patriot Act and later the FISA amendments. We disagreed on those. We disagreed on amendments that I introduced with Senator Durbin to limit the intrusiveness of U.S. intelligence gathering activities relative to American citizens. We've continued to disagree on a number of things over the years. Senator Leahy and I introduced the USA Freedom Act, a law that was passed with bipartisan support in both houses of Congress, signed into law by President Obama, that ended the warrantless practice of bulk metadata collection with regard to American citizens. Senator Sessions was a vocal, vigorous opponent of the USA Freedom Act. Senator Sessions disagreed strongly with another top priority of mine, which involves criminal justice reform. Senator Durbin, Senator Whitehouse, and several others who serve on this committee joined with me in pushing forward a number of efforts to achieve criminal justice reform, including the Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act and the Smarter Sentencing Act. He opposed us on those. Senator Sessions has disagreed with me on a number of immigration reforms that I have supported. Senator Sessions opposed the work that I did with Senator Feinstein when she and I introduced the Due Process Guarantee Act, which is designed to make sure that the U.S. government cannot indefinitely detain U.S. citizens arrested on U.S. soil without charge or trial in violation of a whole host of constitutional rights and the fundamental concept of due process itself. He opposed us on that. Senator Sessions has opposed efforts that I've undertaken with Senator Leahy with regard to reforming a 1986 law called the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, a law that was passed when I was in the 9th grade, a law that was passed at a time when no one really knew what email was outside of a few circles inside government, the military, and a handful of elite universities, and that purports to give the government the power to read your emails without a warrant under certain circumstances, merely with the passage of time. Senator Sessions and I take different positions with regard to legislation supported by many, including Senator Sessions, regarding electronic communications transaction records. So Senator Sessions and I have a fundamentally different view toward the law and a whole host of issues. And on many of these issues, we're dealing with topics that cut to the core of at least constitutional policy, the spirit, if not also the letter, of what the Constitution requires. And yet, in this entire time that I've been at the United States Senate serving with Senator Sessions, with whom I have disagreed more times than I can even count. I've mentioned just a few of the instances in which he and I have disagreed.
It's not as well.
pizza report. That's the message.
I could certainly have to do it.
Eric. Make them long.
They started teaching in animals just 30 years. But she always told me they won't even be
How are we doing?
I met him back right. Not quite the same. He got kicked out. Yeah, but the option you can do the meltdown. They're like, you're out. He's like, yeah, we used to trick him in a net. We actually, because it was, he got a dog like a net. Yeah. Yeah, she's got something else. Yeah, mix.
We have 7 present. Mrs. Feinstein's coming. So, Senator Hirono, you're next.
Chairman.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I understand you raised a question about the 2-hour rule, and it is my understanding that Leader Schumer will invoke the 2-hour rule.
Okay. Then let me respond to that. What we'll do then is we'll meet tomorrow at 10:30, and we'll immediately have a vote. Proceed with your speech.
Thank you very much. I've served with Senator Sessions throughout my time in the Senate and respect him as a colleague. But I oppose his nomination to serve as Attorney General because I have deep concerns about how Senator Sessions would use his prosecutorial discretion to address a number of critical issues. I also have concerns about his independence from President Trump. Over the weekend, President Trump ordered what amounts to a religious test for immigrants. People are being stranded in airports and cut off from their lives in America because they are Muslim. During his confirmation hearing, I asked Senator Sessions if he would support the enhanced vetting of those with extreme views. I also asked him if he thought someone's religion was enough to qualify him or her as holding extreme views. I did not receive a satisfactory answer. During his confirmation hearing, I asked Senator Sessions if he would honor the historical role of the Attorney General and maintain strict independence from the White House. Again, I did not receive a satisfactory answer. I am particularly concerned about this issue because this morning, last night, President Trump fired Acting Attorney General Sally Yates because, very importantly, she refused to be a rubber stamp for what I consider his despicable executive order, in effect, establishing a Muslim ban. By firing Sally Yates, President Trump sent a very clear message that he expects the Attorney General to do what he wants, not what the Constitution or laws require. To understand how an Attorney General should discharge his or her responsibility, we need only look to an exchange between Sally Yates and Senator Sessions during her confirmation hearing in 2015. Senator Sessions, at her confirmation hearing, said, I quote, "Do you understand that in this political world there will be people calling, demanding, pushing, insisting on things that they do not know what they're asking for, and could indeed be corrosive of the rule of law and diminish the respect the Department of Justice has, could diminish the rule of law in the United States. Are you aware of that? You've already learned that the time you've been here, learned that at the time that you've been here." And Ms. Yates said, and I quote her, "Well, you're right, Senator. I am not from here. I've only been here for a couple of months, but I can tell you I'm committed to the Department of Justice. I love our department. I care deeply about our mission, and I would do everything in my power to protect the integrity in the department. That is the Department of Justice." Senator Sessions went on, quote, "You have to watch out because people will be asking you to do things you just need to say no about. Do you think the Attorney General has responsibility to say no to the President if he asks for something that's improper? If the views of the President are unlawful, should the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General say no?" Ms. Yates said, "Senator, I believe the AG or Deputy AG has the obligation to follow the law and the Constitution and to give their independent legal advice to the President." She did that, and we all know what happened to her. The people of the United States deserve an Attorney General who will stand up to the President to defend the Constitution, especially when the President is wrong. My colleagues know I am not given to hyperbole, but at this moment, less than 2 weeks into the Trump presidency, I cannot overstate the message that President Trump is sending to his administration and to the American people, that he will not allow anyone to tell him that he is wrong. There are a number of other issues I would like to address as well. During Senator Sessions' confirmation hearing, I also pressed him for a commitment to vigorously protect every citizen's right to vote, particularly with regard to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which safeguards Americans from discriminatory voting laws. And we all know that after the decision that was made by the Supreme Court that basically gutted the Voting Rights Act, that there's one section that remained, Section 2, that allows for looking at these laws, analyzing these laws from the point of whether it has a discriminatory effect. At a time when our president is making false claims of massive voter fraud, we need an attorney general who will vigorously protect the right to vote. Senator Sessions did not provide me with a satisfactory answer that he would scrutinize voting laws for discriminatory effect under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. This means that challenging these kinds of voting laws, which many states have enacted after that Supreme Court's decision, that challenging these laws will be left to individuals and groups such as the NAACP with their limited resources. I also asked Senator Sessions whether he would honor the Department of Justice's consent decrees, some 20 of them that address police misconduct and enhance their accountability. Senator Sessions did not adequately assure me that his department would uphold these agreements. In fact, he left the door open for renegotiating these agreements. I pressed Senator Sessions for a commitment to defend Roe v. Wade in federal court and to enforce laws that guarantee the constitutionally protected women's right to choose. Senator Sessions did not disavow his past comments that Roe v. Wade was one of the worst Supreme Court cases ever decided, and that this case was not based on the Constitution, when in fact, the majority decision did base their decision on Roe v. Wade on the Constitution. So should the Supreme Court be presented with a case that provides them the opportunity to overrule Roe v. Wade, I asked Senator Sessions what he would direct the Solicitor General to do. He said this was hypothetical and didn't respond. Senator Sessions' view on Roe v. Wade is clear. Would any of us be surprised if, as Attorney General, he would support overturning Roe v. Wade should the opportunity to do so present itself? As one of his first actions, the President reinstated a ban on foreign aid to health providers abroad who discuss abortion. I seriously question whether the President, his cabinet, and advisors will protect a woman's right to choose. Over the past 2 months, I've heard from thousands of my constituents and a number of prominent civil rights organizations, including a number who testified at the confirmation hearing of Senator Sessions, questioning his nomination. So I will vote against the nomination of Jeff Sessions as Attorney General because I am deeply concerned about how he would use his prosecutorial discretion. I would be concerned about his independence from the President. Turning to the topic of President Trump's executive orders establishing basically a Muslim ban, we have heard from my Democratic colleagues that Senator Sessions' fingerprints are on this executive order. Stoking fear of minorities and immigrants is an unfortunate but undeniable part of our nation's history. And this fear has been used to justify terrible things, from the Trail of Tears to slavery and the treatment of African Americans in our country. In 1882, decades of incitement against Chinese immigrants resulted in the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, an immoral law that banned all Chinese immigration. This law and others that followed created a culture of fear that culminated in the mass internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. This was one of the darkest periods of American history that took decades for our country to acknowledge. Yesterday, we commemorated what would have been civil rights icon Fred Korematsu's 98th birthday. As Japanese Americans were rounded up for incarceration, Mr. Korematsu, he was only 23 at the time, bravely resisted the internment all the way to the United States Supreme Court, which upheld his conviction as being justified by the exigencies of war. 40 years later, documents that have been kept from the Supreme Court when they reviewed Mr. Korematsu's conviction came to light, and it showed that Japanese Americans were not involved in seditious acts and that a mass incarceration of Japanese Americans based on race was not justified. Mr. Korematsu waited 40 years for a court in California to overturn his conviction. President Reagan gave a moving speech in which he apologized for the internment. And I would like to read that speech now because I think it's important. It is a reminder that what we are doing now is not right. President Reagan said, quote, "The members of Congress and distinguished guests, my fellow Americans, we gather here today to right a grave wrong. More than 40 years ago, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living in the United States were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in makeshift internment camps. This action was taken without trial, without jury. It was based solely on race. For these 120,000 were Americans of Japanese descent. Yes, the nation was then at war, struggling for its survival. And it's not for us today to pass judgment upon those who may have made mistakes while engaged in that great struggle. Yet we must recognize that the internment of Japanese Americans was just that, a mistake. For throughout the war, Japanese Americans in the tens of thousands remained utterly loyal to the United States. Indeed, scores of Japanese Americans volunteered for our armed services, many stepping forward in the internment camps themselves. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, made up entirely of Japanese Americans, served with immense distinction to defend this nation, their nation. Yet back at home, the soldiers' families were being denied the very freedom for which so many of the soldiers themselves were laying down their lives. Congressman Norman Mineta, with us today, was 10 years old when his family was interned. In the congressman's words, this is Norm speaking, "My own family was sent first to Santa Anita Racetrack. We showered in the horse paddocks. Some families lived in converted stables, others in hastily thrown together barracks. We were then moved to Hart Mountain, Wyoming, where our entire family lived in one small room of a rude tar paper barracks." President Reagan went on to say, like so many tens of thousands of others, the members of the Mineta family lived in those conditions, not for a matter of weeks or months, but for 3 long years. The legislation that I, President Reagan, am about to sign provides for a restitution payment to each of the 60,000 surviving Japanese Americans of the 120,000 who were relocated or detained. Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law. I'd like to note that the bill I'm about to sign also provides funds for members of the Aleut community who were evacuated from the Aleutian and Pribilof Islands after a Japanese attack in 1942. This action was taken for the Aleut's own protection, but property was lost or damaged that has never been replaced. And now, in closing, I wonder whether you permit me one personal reminiscence, one prompted by an old newspaper report sent to me by Rose Ochi, a former internee. And this is President Reagan continuing. The clipping comes from the Pacific Citizen and is dated December 1945. And this clipping said, arriving by plane from Washington, the article begins, General Joseph W. Stilwell pinned the Distinguished Service Cross on Mary Masuda in a simple ceremony on the porch of her small frame shack near Talbot, Orange County. She was one of the first Americans of Japanese ancestry to return from relocation centers to California's farmlands. Vinegar Joe Stilwell was there that day to honor Kazuo Masuda, Mary's brother. You see, while Mary and her parents were in an internment camp, Kazuo served as staff sergeant to the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. In one action, Kazuo ordered his men back and advanced through heavy fire, hauling, and mortar for 12 hours. He engaged in a single-handed barrage of Nazi positions. Several weeks later, at Casino, Kazuo staged another lone advance, this time it cost him his life. The newspaper clipping notes that her 2 surviving brothers were with Mary and her parents on the little porch that morning. These 2 brothers, like the heroic Kazuo, had served in the United States Army. After General Stilwell made the award, the motion picture actress Louise Albritton, a Texas girl, told how a Texas battalion had been saved by the 442nd. Other show business personalities paid tribute: Robert Young, Will Rogers Jr., and one young actor said, quote, "Blood that is soaked into the sand of a beach is all of one color. America stands unique in the world, the only country not founded on race, but on a way, an ideal. Not in spite of, but because of our polyglot background, we have had all the strength in the world. That is the American way," end quote. The name of that young actor was Ronald Reagan. And yes, the ideal of liberty and justice for all, that is still the American way. In making these statements, President Reagan signed H.R. 442, so fittingly named in honor of the 442nd. And he went on to, "God bless our country." And this is how President Reagan ended his remarks upon signing that historic legislation. In the years that followed, many American presidents also reflected on the injustice visited upon Japanese Americans during World War II. And in their record of service to the nation, successive American presidents awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Fred Korematsu, Gordon Hirabayashi, and Minoru Yasui in different years. And it is not often that I can read into our record comments made by the presidents as they awarded these Medal of Freedom, so I'd like to do so now. I'd like to read President Clinton's remarks as he awarded Fred Korematsu the Medal of Freedom. Quote, "In 1942, an ordinary American took an extraordinary stand. Fred Korematsu boldly opposed the forced internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. After being convicted for failing to report for relocation, Mr. Korematsu took his case all the way to the Supreme Court. The High Court ruled against him. But 39 years later, he had his conviction overturned in federal court, empowering tens of thousands of Japanese Americans and giving him what he said he wanted most of all, the chance to feel like an American once again. In the long history of our country's constant search for justice, some names of ordinary citizens stand for millions of souls: Plessy, Brown, Parks. To that distinguished list today, we add the name of Fred Korematsu." Those are President Clinton's comments. In 2010, California established Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and the Constitution on January 30th in perpetuity. Other states have followed, including Hawaii, Virginia, and Florida. I want to also read into the record President Obama's speech awarding Gordon Hirabayashi the Medal of Freedom in 2012. Quote, "Gordon Hirabayashi knew what it was like to stand alone. As a student at the University of Washington, Gordon was one of only 3 Japanese Americans to defy the executive order that forced thousands of families to leave their homes, their jobs, and their civil rights behind and move to internment camps during World War II. He took his case all the way to the Supreme Court, and he lost. And it would be another 40 years before that decision was reversed, giving Asian Americans everywhere a small measure of justice. In Gordon's words, it takes a crisis to tell us that unless citizens are willing to stand up for the Constitution, it's not worth the paper it's written on." President Obama went on to say, and this country is better off because of citizens like him who are willing to stand up. In his open defiance of discrimination against Japanese Americans during World War II, Gordon Kiyoshi Hirabayashi demanded our nation live up to his founding principles. Gordon Hirabayashi's legacy reminds us that patriotism is rooted not in ethnicity, but in our shared ideals. And the same goes for the other person whose comments I would like to read upon his receipt of the Medal of Freedom, and that is Minoru Yasui in 2015. Quote, on a Saturday night in March of 1942, Minoru Yasui left his law office, he was a lawyer, to walk around Portland, Oregon. It was a seemingly ordinary act that defied the discriminatory military curfew imposed on Japanese Americans during World War II. Min took his case to the Supreme Court and lost, a decision he fought for the rest of his life. Yet despite what Japanese Americans endured, suspicion, hostility, forced removal, internment, Min never stopped believing in the promise of his country. He never stopped fighting for equality and justice for all. Min said, we believe in the greatness and in the great ideals of this country. We think that there is a future for all humanity in the United States of America. Today, Min's legacy has never been more important. It is a call to our national conscience, a reminder of our enduring obligation to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, an America worthy of his sacrifice. The internment of Japanese Americans is yet another example that when we do not stand up against unconstitutional actions like President Trump's Muslim ban, we will be complicit in what follows. I hope that our Republican colleagues will join us on the right side of history. And I commend my Republican colleagues, Senators Graham, McCain, Hatch, Flake, Sass, for their statements. I particularly want to note the joint statement made by Senator Lindsey Graham and John McCain, because I very much admire the position that they took. Their joint statement said, quote, our government has a responsibility to defend our borders, but we must do so in a way that makes us safer and oppose all that is decent and exceptional about our nation. It is clear from the confusion at our airports across the nation that President Trump's executive order was not properly vetted. We are particularly concerned by reports that this order went into effect with little to no consultation with the Department of State, Defense, Justice, and Homeland Security. Such a hasty process risks harmful results. We should not stop green card holders from returning to the country they call home. We should not stop those who have served as interpreters for our military and diplomats from seeking refuge in the country they risk their lives to help. And we should not turn our backs on those refugees who have been shown through extensive vetting to pose no demonstrative threat to our nation, and who have suffered unspeakable horrors, most of them women and children. Ultimately, we fear this executive order will become a self-inflicted wound in the fight against terrorism. At this very moment, American troops are fighting side by side with our Iraqi partners to defeat ISIL. But this executive order bans Iraqi pilots from coming to military bases in Arizona to fight our common enemies. Our most important allies in the fight against ISIL are the vast majority of Muslims who reject its apocalyptic ideology of hatred. This executive order sends a signal, intended or not, that America does not want Muslims coming into our country. That is why we fear this executive order may do more to help terrorist recruitment than improve our security. That is the end of the joint statement that was made by our colleagues.
Okay, good. Let's work it out. You only need a couple of minutes.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask how
President
long
Trump
the
has
senator's been
described.
Senator,
May I ask how long the senator?
I'm coming to the end.
yeah, I think we got everything worked out.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
President,
Go-
may I proceed? President Trump has described the motivation of his recent order as a means to temporarily reduce investigative burdens on relevant agencies. And at this point, I strongly urge the new administration to move quickly to rescind his executive order. And I join my colleagues, my Democratic colleagues, whose statements are already on the record in opposing Jeff Sessions for Attorney General.
Senator Cruz,
I yield the floor.
And then we'll go to White House, and then the way it looks like we're going to do, I think we have an agreement that Senator Franken will speak tomorrow, and then we'll vote when Senator Franken's done speaking. I'd like to, if we could do a time certain tomorrow for you to speak and have a vote, I'd appreciate that very much if you'd communicate to us. Not right now, think about it. Senator Cruz.
I was agreeing to the concept.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we prepare to confirm a new Attorney General, I'd like to speak about keeping this country safe and the rule of law. And I'd like to speak about three issues in particular. Number one, the threat this country faces is real, and it is a threat from radical Islamic terrorism. It is a threat, unfortunately, that the prior administration engaged in willful blindness for 8 long years. Indeed, the Oversight Subcommittee of this committee conducted a hearing where we heard from a whistleblower at the Department of Homeland Security that described how the previous administration scrubbed the records at DHS to remove any reference to Muslim Brotherhood, to radical Islam, to alter and delete roughly 800 records, to be blind to the threat we face. And indeed, this threat is real. I would note a letter that I joined with Jeff Sessions in 2015 and again in 2016 and again another in 2016, pointed out that our investigation identified at least 40 individuals who since September 11th were initially admitted to this country as refugees, who were subsequently convicted of or implicated in terrorism. This is a real problem, and it's an ongoing problem. I would note in France, reading from the Washington Post in April of 2016, quote, "On a crisp morning last October, 198 migrants arrived on the Greek island of Leros. Hiding among them were 4 men with a very different agenda. The 4 were posing as war-weary Syrians." And the Washington Post goes on to note that those refugees who came in went on to carry out the, quote, "worst attack on French soil since World War II." As for vetting, James Comey, the director of the FBI, who I would note was appointed to that position by President Barack Obama, told the United States House of Representatives that vetting was ineffective, in particular in the Syrian war zone. He said, and I quote, "We can only query against that which we have collected. If someone has never made a ripple in the pond in Syria in a way that would get their identity or their interest reflected in our database, we can query our database until the cows come home, but we are not going to. There will be nothing to show up because we have no record on that person." Given that the FBI has told us they cannot vet refugees coming from war zones where there is a serious and persistent problem with radical Islamic terrorism, the threat is real, and for 8 years, we had an administration that was willfully blind to that threat. Indeed, that was, I believe, one of the major issues in this past election, is the American people wanting a president and administration that would prioritize protecting this country and keeping this country safe. Second point I would make, there's been much focus on the President's executive order concerning refugees. I would note that the heart of that order is a common sense step that the vast majority of Americans support. Now, you wouldn't know this from the hysterics and hair on fire that we see on the media, but the heart of that order is a 4-month pause in refugee programs until effective vetting can be implemented. And I would note that that follows quite similarly to legislation I introduced in this previous Congress, legislation called TRIPA that would impose a moratorium on refugees coming from countries where ISIS or al-Qaeda control substantial territory. That is a basic common sense step, and indeed another component of it that has generated considerable consternation among our Democratic colleagues is the fact that President Trump's order reverses the 8-year pattern of discrimination against persecuted minorities, in particular Christians, in the Middle East. The blindness of the Obama administration to the plight of Christians in the Middle East is one of the great tragedies of the modern day. Syrian population is roughly 10% Christian, and yet fewer than 1% of the refugees admitted from Syria are Christian. That is all the more striking given that ISIS is engaging in systematic torture, persecution, oppression, and genocide targeted at Middle East Christians. And although you would never get it watching the mainstream media, what this order did quite reasonably was focus on persecuted
And I would say that we still have 5 minutes before the 2-hour rule. I've got 2 Republicans that haven't spoken yet. If you would like to divide that 6 minutes, I should give you the courtesy. That's not much time, but if you want to speak, I'd be happy to have you speak. How about Senator Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can do it in less than 6 minutes. An honorable American who happened to be president at the time, with whose policies I disagree, once said that elections have consequences. And he was right. The President of the United States has nominated people in whom he has confidence to be in his cabinet, one of whom is Senator Jeff Sessions. President Obama did the same thing. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton would have done the same thing had she been elected. Now, you may not like the political positions of the president. You may not like the political positions of the president's nominees. You may not like his nominees' votes. You may not like who his nominees supported for president. You may not even like the region of the country from which his nominees hail. And that's fair. This is America. You can believe what you want. That's what's great about our country. But I don't think any reasonable person can conclude that Senator Jeff Sessions is not qualified if you define qualified as being capable of being a great attorney general. I mean, if you just look at his record, he supports the rule of law. He's demonstrated that by his words as well as his deeds. In a former life, I used to be state treasurer. I wrote a lot of checks I didn't agree with. And I have no doubt that Senator Sessions, once he becomes Attorney General, will enforce the law whether he agrees with it or not. I believe Senator Sessions has demonstrated that he respects the Bill of Rights. I think everybody at this table holds that document sacred, as we should. I think Senator Sessions understands that the purpose of the Bill of Rights, let me put it this way. The high school quarterback and the prom queen don't need the Bill of Rights. It's the unprotected. It's the people who choose to be different in America. That's why it's such a great document. And I think Jeff Sessions respects that. His experience, he's been a United States Senator. I assume we give that some merit. He's been a state attorney general. And he's been a U.S. attorney. And I noticed during the hearings that Senator Sessions, his body language changed, and his eyes lit up when he talked about what it was like to be a U.S. attorney. I think he loves the Department of Justice. Now, I've only been here a short time, but I've had a number of conversations with Jeff Sessions, and I'll tell you the thing that impresses me the most, his humility. He places himself intentionally lower than the people. And it hasn't escaped my attention in the 4 weeks I've been here that there are more than a few people around here that act like they were one of the founding fathers. Jeff Sessions is not one of them. I think he'll be a great attorney general, and he has my unqualified support.
The committee will stand in recess until tomorrow morning at 10:30, with I hope that all Republicans and Democrats can be here around 11:10 to 11:15. Thank you all very much.
Well done, Chuck.
Thank you very much.
Until 20 and 22 minutes is 12. But we need 5 or 6 Republicans in order to have 8. You can't do it. They won't let us do anything unless we get at least 8 people here to speak. Okay? Right. So we got to be here. Yeah. Well, either well, people can't be here, get somebody else to be here. We got to have 5 Republicans. Assuming that there are 2. So assuming if we got, we must have a total of 7. 6. Yeah. Thank you.
Shall Well, I have your cup.
Oh, will you?
I'll give it to Beth. Or I
Well,
can put it back to the
Beth's going to go with me.
Okay.
So give it to Jan. Yeah.
Chairman Grassley announcing that the Judiciary Committee will recess until tomorrow. Back in tomorrow, we expect at about 10:30 Eastern, and the vote sometime before 11 o'clock Eastern. We will bring you live coverage on the C-SPAN networks. And we're going to take you now live over to the House side of Capitol Hill. GAO officials and the Health and Human Services Department Inspector General were testifying in a hearing that just got underway, a House subcommittee hearing about potential areas